While some stories of paranormal events may seem far-fetched and fake, there are a few that'll leave chills running down your spine. The world is full of many possibilities which may or may not include the presence of spirits. Back in 2013, Emily Madonia's daughter was given an Elsa doll. Little did the Houston, Texas family know that this doll would haunt them for the rest of their lives. This Elsa doll would have two language settings, which were English and Spanish. Emily had taken to social media and explained the situation with this creepy doll. After a few years, she noticed that the doll would start singing by itself sometimes in Spanish, even though the switch would be off. The family had been clearing out some toys in order to make space for new ones, and so the Elsa doll, which Emily believed was short-circuiting, was the first to go. Emily's partner, Matt, had thrown the doll in a garbage can with a lot of other bags and took them outside to the garbage can where they would await collection. Emily explains that 1 week later, they had been opening a large wooden bench in the living room, and inside it, Matt had discovered the very doll that he had thrown away. It was laying on top of some blankets, and Matt began to yell. This is when Emily had entered the room and explained in her post that Matt had 100% thrown this doll away. She explains that her children would not have taken it out of the garbage or even been able to identify which bag it was in without rummaging through all of it. Emily ended up asking the children about it anyway, and they were very much confused. After a bit of back and forth arguing about who was going to touch the doll, Matt had gotten another garbage bag and tied the doll tightly inside, and off it went into the garbage can underneath more trash. Emily expressed that either the doll was actually haunted or someone was messing with the family and digging the doll out of the trash can, breaking into her home, and placing the doll in random areas. She explained that it was this exact same Elsa doll each time, because her child had drawn in specific areas with markers, so it would be easy to identify if it was a different doll. Some people commented that she should burn the toy, but she resisted this by stating that burning it would do no good. She furthered this by saying that if the doll was possessed, then the spirit would simply come out of it. Emily maintained that she did not completely believe in the spirit world, but she did want the toy off of her property, and continuously asked for more suggestions, and even said that she would have her mind open to the paranormal. Some of the commenters told Emily that the doll is supposed to speak in Spanish, but her response was a little eerie. She stated that for the first 2 years, the toy had only spoken in English, but now it only speaks in Spanish, regardless of the button position and even when it's off. She ended up mailing the toy to an online friend of hers named Chris Hogan, who lived 1,500 miles away. He had offered to take the doll off of her hands. Emily noted that just as she was placing the doll back inside the box, it had laughed for 30 seconds, which was not one of her settings, nor had it ever done something like that before. Once the doll was in Chris's hands, he duct taped it to the front of his Jeep for safekeeping. The story became so popular that it actually made the news. Various news pages covered the story of a creepy haunted Elsa doll. Emily explained that one of her friends had contacted her and told her that the haunted doll story had been covered on various news platforms. In this post, she asked why it made the news and stated that she had no idea that she would have gotten so much of a response on her creepy doll story. She also explained that she declined any interviews from news platforms. Additionally, there's a video of the creepy Elsa doll that kept on reappearing at the Madonia family house. In the video, we can see the toy placed in the corner of the garden, and it appears that Emily is pressing the button on the doll to make it speak. The words that come out are in Spanish. While the general look of the doll is not particularly creepy, it's quite strange that it kept showing up at the house despite numerous attempts of getting rid of it. The Pittock Mansion is situated on a 46-acre estate, which overlooks Portland, Oregon. This building is made of sandstone and was built in 1914 with 46 rooms. Henry Pittock was 19 years old when he joined a wagon train in 1953. The journey began in Pennsylvania and ended in Portland. He then got a job working for the newspaper known as Thomas Jefferson Dryer's Weekly, Oregonian newspaper, which he then purchased at the age of 26. He made the company into a daily paper. He then married a woman that he loved named Georgiana Burton from Missouri. The two then found themselves living in the Pittock Mansion, where they remained until their demise. Georgiana passed away in 1819 and Henry in 1831. Those who were left of the Pittock family resided in the mansion up until the 1950s. After not being inhabited for 4 years, the mansion took some serious damage when the Columbus Day storm hit in 1962. The plan was to demolish the storm-damaged building, but it was saved by the city. A restoration was later done on the Pittock Mansion, and in 1965, the Pittock Mansion Museum was born. It was when the museum began to operate that the strange activity began. Both visitors as well as staff have agreed that there's something off about the mansion. They believe that it's haunted by the ghosts of Henry and Georgiana, who are unable to leave this mansion even in the afterlife. The footsteps of the couple can often be heard in the hallway or when coming out of a room. Individuals have claimed that they've heard the sounds of boots walking around the garden before entering through the side door. Many believe that this was the gardener who had resided at the Pittock Mansion before passing. Additionally, the sounds of shovels hitting the soil have also been noticed occasionally on the northern side of the estate. There have also been accounts of the windows opening and closing by themselves. One of the more strange reports is of furniture moving around all on its own, including pictures hung on the walls. They believe that this is the ghostly couple simply rearranging their house. A ghostly apparition of a woman in a long gown has also been documented. It's said that as soon as she's spotted, she quickly disappears. On one occasion, one of the staff members had been switching off all the lights, and as soon as she turned to leave, they all came back on at once. The rooms with the most activity seem to be in the upper levels of the mansion. It's reported that when individuals enter this room, they're overcome by the intense aroma of rose perfume, which Georgiana wore. Staff believe that the scent overwhelms the visitors because Georgiana wants to make her presence known. According to some of the staff members, footsteps from unknown regions seem to start at random and sometimes carry on for all hours of the day. A portrait of Henry has also been documented moving around on the hook on which it hangs, seemingly all by itself. In another incident, a visitor had heard a picture fall off the wall in the next room. Upon investigating the noise, she came to find a woman in a long gown picking the picture up. The visitor turned around to speak to a staff member who was asking if she was okay, and when she turned back to the apparition, it had vanished. Due to the vintage interior, the beautiful mansion was also used in some films. In 1977, the mansion appeared in a movie named First Love with William Catt and Susan Day. A few years later, in 1982, the mansion was used in a slasher film named Unhinged. This movie was shot at night and made use of interior as well as exterior walls of the mansion. Unhinged became the most infamous movie to be filmed at the Pittock Mansion. The Pittock Mansion Museum is still operational today, and guests are invited to witness the creepy and strange activity that occurs there. It's possibly the mansion that has the most ghostly activity in Portland, Oregon. Whether it's the loving couple or other spirits who found their way there, these events would certainly startle anyone who witnesses it. Nevada is said to be full of haunted streets and roads. There are also many ghost towns or abandoned mines scattered at random around the area. This is the state where paranormal hunters may find their fix of ghostly activity. One of these supposedly haunted streets is situated in Las Vegas. This is called Sand Hill Road, which stretches between Olive Avenue and Charleston Boulevard. The road in particular is said to be subject to a lot of strange legends. The story says that a couple haunts the tunnels situated underneath the roadway. It's believed that there are hundreds of miles of tunnels that also surround the city, which are believed to be for the purpose of flash floods. Some who have driven along this road claim to hear eerie whispers and moans coming from deep underground. The tunnels are only 3 feet in height, and would be impossible for anyone to fit underneath it, which only adds fuel to the story that the road and tunnels beneath it are really haunted. In addition to the eerie whispers comes the creepy apparition of an unknown elderly woman who's said to chase after vehicles driving on her road. The story states that once the driver is off of the road, she disappears. The tunnels in question are also guarded by strong fencing that no one would easily be able to get through. The tunnels travel underneath Highway 85 and start on Sand Hill Road, where the entrance can be found. Some investigators took to the scene to see if they would experience any of this ghostly activity. They found that they didn't hear any whispers or get chased by an old woman, but they did get very nauseous while parked on the safe side of the road. They left the area and started to feel better, but once they returned, they were again met with a massive feeling of nausea. In other stories of the haunted road, some have reported hearing zombie-like scraping noises or high-pitched screeching. Many individuals seem to leave the area as soon as they encounter such paranormal activity, which leaves only very little to no evidence of the claims. In addition to the zombie noises, some believe that there are zombies roaming beneath the road or on it, but those who encounter them seem to flee before they get any closer. Another story explains that a couple haunts the road, and there have been reports stating that their shadows can be seen in the one area. It's also been documented that some individuals have felt as though someone or something is touching them. Inhuman laughter has been heard along with the sight of other shadows moving in a way that a person shouldn't be able to. Many personal stories have come up regarding this haunted road, including one where an individual and his colleague could smell something rotten coming from the area and reported that their headlamps would occasionally flicker when investigating the area, as well as hearing whispering in their ears while leaving before being met with darkness. During the same experience, the driver left the tunnel area, and as he was continuing along the road, he came to see a figure standing beneath a light, which had startled him enough to force him to look the other way in fear that if she had seen him look at her, then she would chase him down. As he drove further, he looked to his rearview mirror and noticed the outline of a shadowy figure almost directly on his windshield, causing him to slam on the brakes. As soon as he did so, the figure disappeared. Then she reappeared just long enough to identify some features. She's described as not having any visible features aside from long hair. She said to not have eyes or a face, but the individual expressed that it felt as though she was staring at him. In the late 1960s, the Cranston Historical Society, which had been led by Viola and Robert Lynch, bought the Sprag Mansion, ultimately saving it from being dismantled by the city. Unfortunately, what they didn't know at the time was that their house came with a few ghostly spirits. The last people to reside in the mansion were supervisors of Cranston Print Works. They later moved out after deciding that they didn't need such a large property. It was then believed that the house was empty when the Historical Society bought it. The mansion consisted of 28 rooms, and the entirety of it needed some extensive repairs. The members of the society were all happy to work on these repairs. One of them had volunteered to take on what's known as the doll room, which was a smaller room that had marionettes and other creepy dolls in it. It was 1968 when the first strange encounter was documented by the Historical Society. The member working in the doll room had seen something white and filmy in this particular room, and therefore refused to be in there by himself. Two members, Kennedy and Bell, had also witnessed something creepy on the cameras of the doll room. One of them had also captured images of the moment one of the doll's eyes had moved. What's creepy about this is that the eyes were painted on, and not the removable eyes that some dolls are made with. The mansion's wine cellar was also subject to some scary occurrences. Some of the members reported seeing some glowing orbs moving around the cellar. Bell had also seen a woman in the highest point of the mansion. In 2007, the Sprag Mansion was featured on Ghost Hunters, and it was discovered that the actual first ghostly report had been in 1925, when one of the visitors stated that they had seen an apparition on the stairway situated in the center of the mansion. A few years later, the wife of the Cranston Printworks manager, Ethel Duckworth, stated that she was alone in the wine cellar at night when she'd felt like something brushed against her arm, and in a separate incident, a visitor had also been alone in the cellar when a filmy white thing had brushed against her arm as well. That visitor never returned to the mansion again. Other visitors have reported an icy presence. Occasionally, there have been strange sightings seen in the mirrors found around the mansion. A strange theory was brought up as to who the haunting ghost might be. Strangely, many believe that it's not a relative of the Sprag family, but rather a butler. The story of Charlie the Butler began right after the Cranston Historical Society bought the property. Bob Lynch Jr. and some of the Brown University classmates had been doing a nightly guard of the mansion. They reported that throughout the night, strange things began to happen while they had been trying to sleep. Blankets were said to be thrown off of their beds, but none of them had been the person doing it, and they certainly were not joking around. So the men decided that they would create a makeshift Ouija board. The board spelled out the eerie instruction, "Tell my story." The spirit explained that his name was Charlie, and that he had been a butler to a family who resided in the mansion after the Sprag family had lived there. Charlie stated that he wanted his daughter to marry the son of the family he was employed with, but that never happened, which left his dream of wealth and land in ruins. It was reported that the board reportedly spelled out the words "my land." Greg Mirka, the director of the Cranston Historical Society, expressed some more stories that were told regarding the creepy events that happened there. According to some passers-by, they often see a lady standing at the highest point of the mansion. The individuals would either be walking or driving by when seeing her. It's stated that she watches them as they pass, or she paces back and forth in front of the window. The famous doll room, which no longer exists, was made in the 1700s, which is where most of the activity would be heard. Mirka explained that some visitors would come to the mansion and think that the dolls were talking to them. Paranormal investigators have also confirmed that there's definitely something in the mansion, but they can't figure out what exactly it is. Mirka's wife stated that she had heard footsteps, but Mirka maintains that he was on the other side of the house. Some have suggested that the female spirit could be Kate Chase, who was the wife of Governor William Sprag. She had been to the mansion before her engagement to William, and was once said to be one of the wealthiest women in America. After their divorce, Kate had fallen into poverty and subsequently passed away in 1899. It's suggested that a mirror in the mansion may still hold her spirit. Many paranormal lovers seem to think that any person part of the Sprag family who lived in the mansion could be haunting it, since they didn't have very happy lives. North Oasis Street is situated along Riverside Cemetery in Appleton and is subject to a variety of strange paranormal activity. Some people have reported seeing the ghosts of what they take to be mourners who were dressed in attire from an earlier era. Since this road is found near a cemetery, it makes sense as to why it's become a paranormal hotspot. Aside from phantom mourners, some have even seen ghosts traveling via a carriage, which then randomly disappears as it continues on. Those who have experienced these strange occurrences have said that one particular grave is where most of the events occur. This is the grave of a woman named Kate Blood. Some say that they've seen her ghost wearing a hooded cloak, wandering around her gravestone, as well as the others in the cemetery. There are many different stories surrounding Kate and how she came to pass, but none of these were ever able to be confirmed. The well-known legend was that Kate was a vengeful witch. Historians believe that Kate became sick with tuberculosis at the age of 23, and this disease had later taken her life. Kate's husband, George Miller, remarried and lived another 42 years. The second wife was laid to rest in the same cemetery. Strangely, Kate's grave is located off the path, and one would have needed to know exactly where to go in order to find it. Visitors to the cemetery who were drawn there by the creepy witch story have said that their tombstone feels significantly warmer to the touch than any other nearby stones. Some paranormal enthusiasts have even claimed to see a strange substance dripping over the grave on the nights when the moon is full. Her full name was Kate Marcia Blood Miller, and she had been a beloved member of the area. When she passed, the community had mourned. Perhaps her spirit has remained in the grave because her husband had remarried, as some suggest. The fact that her grave is situated in a random place only adds fuel to the legend of Kate Blood. However, it's also believed that the tombstone was placed apart from the others to hide a horrible deed that she had been accused of. This is not the only haunted road to exist. There are many strange and creepy highways, tunnels, roads, streets, and bridges that are known for their ghostly activity. Individuals are not encouraged to trespass into certain locations in order to meet these ghostly apparitions. Anyone should take caution when investigating such paranormal activity, with all kinds of precautionary measures being taken. A simple set of directions can lead one to the gravestone, which is situated near the Fox River. When driving along the cemetery, one must keep to the outer paved roads until a gravel path leads them down to a chain and a caution sign. This is where the individual should park and walk the rest of the way. It's situated down an old gravel road. A left turn is made, and the largest headstone is that of Kate's. There are another 2 smaller stones a distance in front of it, which are the stones of George Miller and his second wife. Home to 700 of the world's most dangerous prisoners, Penal Colony No. 6, also known as Black Dolphin, is considered one of the world's most dangerous prisons. The methods used to contain prisoners are enough to make anyone shudder. Prisons around the world are often dubbed as terrifying or hard, but none are as hellish as Black Dolphin. Many inmates suffer from severe depression and mental health issues due to being locked up for 23 hours a day. Once the bars slam behind you, there's only one way out of Black Dolphin. During the early 1900s, the prison was used by the NKVD, the force responsible for prison camps and labor. Many enemies of the state suffered at Black Dolphin, and their suffering is entrenched in its walls and grounds. The prison has undergone several changes, most recently in the early 2000s, when it began accepting some of Russia's most disturbing individuals. The 700 criminals that populate the prison now are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, including cannibalism. After being sentenced, criminals are put into a van and driven to Black Dolphin. Prisoners across Russia know and fear the prison. Once you arrive as a prisoner, there's only one way out, in a body bag. So far in its history, no prisoner has ever escaped, no matter how hard they've tried. The prison is built in a maze-like structure with high walls, barbed wire, sniper towers, and guard dogs at the ready. The guards often live on prison grounds in their own wings and have significant discontent with those they guard. Most guards admit they no longer see the prisoners as people, merely animals in cages. Those imprisoned at Black Dolphin are in for a long and uncomfortable sentence. Each prisoner is confined to their 50-square-foot cell for almost 23 hours a day. They're awoken at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and must remain awake until 10 p.m. Prisoners are not allowed to sit on their beds during this time, nor are they allowed to take naps. Every 15 minutes, a guard will shout out and prisoners must respond. Each cell is guarded with thick iron bars and is equipped with CCTV. Guards exert control over every aspect of a prisoner's life. They decide when they're allowed to shower, eat, exercise, and sleep. For 90 minutes a day, prisoners are allowed to exercise. While one might think that this is a welcomed escape from the confines of the cell, you'd be wrong. Prisoners are not allowed outside. Instead, they're led to cages or pits with an iron-barred roof for sunlight. For 90 minutes, they're allowed to pace up and down the pit before being returned to their cell. The way Black Dolphin guards transport prisoners is yet another example of the control they exert over them. If a prisoner must be transported between their cell and another area of the prison, they're first handcuffed. Guards then force the prisoner to bend forward and put their arms up in a stressful position. Prisoners are also regularly blindfolded while they're guided around the prison. This ensures no prisoner is ever able to create a mental map of the prison and its layout. No prisoner has ever escaped from Black Dolphin, and guards work hard to keep it that way. There's also no canteen at Black Dolphin, giving prisoners zero time to socialize with one another. 4 meals of soup and bread a day are served to prisoners directly in their cells, and there's no commissary in which to purchase snacks. Long-standing prisoners at Black Dolphin have had plenty of time for reflection and introspection, with many agreeing they belong there due to their violent and animalistic nature. Others go insane under the pressure of isolation and dehumanization. In 2018, serial killer Mikhail Popkov joined the ranks of the notorious Russian serial killers in the confines of Black Dolphin. Popkov is considered to be one of, if not the worst serial killers Russia has ever seen. He abused his power as a police officer to commit acts of atrocity, and he was caught, thanks to a DNA test. On October 28, 1998, Tatiana Martinova and her friend Yulia Kuprakova spent the afternoon getting ready together. The 2 girls had gotten tickets for a concert that evening. Initially, Tatiana, also known as Tanya, had planned to attend the concert with her sister Victoria, but she was unable to go. That evening, the 2 women went to the concert and, disturbingly, never returned home. Their families immediately noticed their disappearances and called the police. For hours, the police searched, looking for any sign of the two women, and that's when they found them dumped at the side of the road. Tanya and Yulia had been assaulted before being mutilated and left at the side of the road. The police learned a disturbing clue during their interviews. Tanya and Yulia had accepted a ride from a policeman shortly before they went missing. The police felt uncomfortable that this was one of their own that could be responsible for such crimes, and the two cases went unsolved. Between 1992 and 2010, at least a dozen more young women disappeared, only to be found disfigured and assaulted. Some young women were found in remote areas, and that's when police discovered their next vital clue: tire tracks. The tracks had been made by a car which was used by the police. Police were slowly closing in on the killer. As they gathered more evidence, they knew it was one of their own. Police officers were forced to take DNA tests in 2012, and when the results returned, they were shocking. Months after the DNA tests were ordered, Mikhail Popkov, a long-serving police officer, was arrested and charged with multiple counts. After being confronted with solid evidence, Popkov confessed, telling the police he used his position of power to pick young women up on the side of the road. He mainly targeted street workers, as he felt he was doing society a favor by eliminating them. He would then dispose of their bodies in remote areas. In total, Popkov confessed to taking the lives of 83 women, 78 of which have been confirmed. Popkov's confession makes him the most notorious serial killer in Russian history. As he was once a police officer, guards at Black Dolphin have particular disdain for him, as do fellow inmates. In the brief moments where they're allowed to communicate, many make it known that he's not welcome there. Popkov was sentenced to life, and in 2018, he was transferred to Black Dolphin. Popkov will spend the rest of his days confined to a cell with another man, with only books and a radio for company. United States Penitentiary Leavenworth, also known as USP Leavenworth, is one of the oldest federal prisons in the U.S. USP Leavenworth is located in Leavenworth County, Kansas, which is home to around 38,000 people. Many in Leavenworth are free citizens, able to do as they please and go about their lives, but a select few do not have those freedoms. According to census records, there are around 1,200 inmates at USPL, all of which have committed horrific crimes. Leavenworth may pale compared to Black Dolphin, but that doesn't mean it isn't hiding a few horror stories. USPL sits between two other prisons in the county, the most infamous of which is Fort Leavenworth, a military prison. Fort Leavenworth holds many military deserters and offenders, while USPL is reserved for civilians. Most people get the two mixed up, so to clarify, we're talking about the civilian prison. USPL was built in 1913 and has stood the test of time. It's one of the first federal prisons in the country, and since then, hundreds upon thousands of hardened criminals have walked through its doors. Conditions in US prisons may seem cushy compared to those mentioned previously in this video, but that's not to say Leavenworth hasn't mistreated prisoners before. In 2021, the Missouri Independent published an article damning the Leavenworth Detention Center, which sat close to USPL. The detention center held those awaiting trial on federal charges in Kansas and Missouri. According to the Missouri Independent, at least 2 people took their own lives, and 10 more were seriously injured since it was created. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, USPL, a medium security prison, has many safety precautions in place. Prisoners can expect to be held behind double-fenced walls with state-of-the-art electronic detection equipment. CCTV cameras are the norm at Leavenworth, and a prisoner's every move is captured on camera. There are also a higher number of guards than regular prisons to ensure order and control is maintained. It's estimated that around 75% of medium security inmates, such as those at Leavenworth, have a history of violence. Once all of these inmates are put together in such a confined space, it's only a matter of time before things escalate. Violence is the norm in any prison, but a place like Leavenworth is filled to the brim with violent inmates waiting for their next target. Inmate-on-inmate violence is a daily occurrence, and there are rumors that violence is even perpetrated by staff. The closure of the Leavenworth Detention Center, which was operated by a private company, brought to light the way prisoners are treated in the US. The conditions at the detention center were described as dire, and in 2021, inmates in this center were moved into USP Leavenworth. Over the years, there have been many notorious criminals who have walked through the doors of Leavenworth, such as the bank robber Frank Nash, Machine Gun Kelly, and Harold Monk Fontaine. But none of the criminals were as notorious as serial killer Carl Panzram. Born in 1891, Carl Panzram had a tough childhood. The child of Prussian immigrants, strong ideals were instilled in him at an early age. Life in Minnesota in the 1800s was difficult, especially for the most impoverished, like the Panzrams. They owned a small farm, but the hours of back-breaking labor were often barely enough to put food on the table. Carl's mother and father worked exceedingly hard to feed their 7 children and themselves. Carl's parents showed him little affection, and from the moment he could walk, he was expected to work on the farm and looked after his siblings. This extreme poverty pushed Panzram into crime at the tender age of 11, for which he was sent to the Minnesota State Training School, a school that carried a horrific reputation. Unfortunately, Panzram quickly discovered all of the rumors about the school were true, and he suffered untold abuse at the hands of staff. This reform school shaped Panzram's behavior, and by the time he left, he was a different person. When he returned home, he found it hard to leave crime behind, which caused him to run away from home and live life on the run. Panzram hopped from train to train for many years, buddying up with other transient groups. While on these trains, Panzram would lie, cheat, steal, and start fires. Eventually, Panzram's behavior devolved even further, and in 1920, he went completely off the rails. According to reports, Panzram took the life of William H. Taft, a man who Panzram believed was behind his stint at Fort Leavenworth. After discovering a weapon, Panzram's dark desires took over and he was free to do as he pleased. All of the rage and hatred that had been brewing inside Panzram was about to overflow. He'd served decades between different institutions and prisons in the US, and this spree would ensure he would spend the rest of his life in one. Between 1920 and 1928, Panzram is believed to have been responsible for taking the lives of at least 5 people, although estimates could put this number into double digits. In 1928, Panzram was captured in Washington, D.C. for burglary, and that's when he confessed to taking the lives of 2 people. Prison guards were shocked and asked Panzram more about his crime spree. He told officers his story and how he had robbed and assaulted what he believed to be at least 1,000 men across the continental US. Panzram also confessed to taking the lives of 21 men in a stunning 20,000-word confession. Officials were unaware that most of these crimes had occurred until Panzram's written confession. To round out his confession, Panzram chillingly wrote, "For all these things, I'm not the least bit sorry." A judge ruled Panzram was a danger to society and should be locked away in the infamous Leavenworth Penitentiary. In September of 1930, Panzram made his final walk as his sentence of capital punishment was carried out. During his last moments on Earth, Panzram uttered, "I wish all mankind had one neck so I could choke it." Panzram's stay at Leavenworth was short, but it's put the prison on the map forever. Since 1930, dozens of other serial killers and notorious criminals have joined the ranks at Leavenworth, making it one of the most terrifying prisons in the US. A few miles outside the historic city of Durham lies the village of Brasside, a quiet and idyllic English village. To the outside world, Brasside looks like any other English village, equipped with schools, doctors, supermarkets, and shops. But a dark secret lies past the draw of civilization. HMP Low Newton is a prison that's held some of the UK's most dangerous women since 1965. Many outside of Durham or the northeast of England may not even know of its existence, but the level of prisoners it has held over the years is enough to give anybody chills. In 1965, HMP His Majesty's Prison Service, formerly Her Majesty's, built HMP Low Newton just outside of Durham, England. Durham is a historic city with a prestigious university, and to many, the idea that there was any need for a prison close to them was alarming. According to the UK government website, HMP Low Newton was initially created to house men and women in separate buildings. Over time, the need for a solely women's prison arose in England, as it became apparent that women were equally as capable of the horrific crimes as their male counterparts. In the late 1990s, the prison underwent reform and refurbishment, which created the HMP Low Newton known today. Low Newton is a Category A prison, which means it's a maximum security prison and holds the worst of the worst. Bizarrely, the UK government decided to keep Low Newton as a YOI, or a Young Offenders Institution, where those under 18 are imprisoned. Doing time in an English prison may look somewhat different to a North American prison. Prisoners at HMP Low Newton are kept in cells of 2 or 3, but are given slightly more freedom than their North American counterparts. Women at Low Newton are given DVD players, books, games, and TVs, much to the ire of the tax-paying public. Over the years, British prisons have come under fire for being too lax or soft in how prisoners are confined for the duration of their sentences. Low Newton has also received acclaim and positive comments from inspectorate boards, who are impressed by the services and facilities on offer to the women. In the early 2010s, HMP Low Newton became the only prison in the UK to create a unit specifically designed to deal with women suffering from severe and dangerous personality disorders. The unit is called the Primrose Project, and according to the government, the unit is designed to hold 12 high-risk women suffering from a severe personality disorder. The Primrose Project offers prisoners a chance to access much-needed mental health services and treatments, such as talking therapies and medications. According to official documents, the Primrose Project also provides art therapy, massages, and group activities. While the Primrose Project sounds like a promising attempt at rehabilitation, the women who have found themselves in HMP Low Newton are unlikely to respond well to such treatments. One such prisoner is Joanna Denny, a woman feared by the inmates around her. Denny holds a record, but it's a disturbing and macabre one. Denny is the 3rd woman in British history to receive a whole-life tariff. Denny joins that list with Myra Hindley, one half of the Moors murderers, and Rose West, one half of the infamous West couple. On March 30th, 2013, police in Peterborough, England, discovered the burnt-out car of Kevin Lee. At first glance, the call-out seemed to be an open and shut case of arson or criminal damage. But when police checked their records, they discovered something horrifying. Kevin Lee had been reported missing days earlier. On March 31st, a man walking his dog along the A16 in Newborough, around 6 miles from Peterborough, discovered the body of 48-year-old Kevin Lee in a ditch. According to the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, Kevin was found wearing a black sequin dress hitched at the waist and had been posed in a humiliating way. Kevin had suffered several puncture wounds to his chest, which penetrated his lungs and his heart. The discovery of Kevin Lee was yet another piece of a horrific puzzle for British police. On April 2nd, 2013, Joanna Denny, Gary Stretch Richards, and Leslie Layton were driving through Hereford after traveling across southern England when Joanna told Stretch that she wanted to have her fun. In the span of 30 minutes, Joanna jumped out of her car and attacked 2 men, Robin Bereza and John Rogers. Both men had been out walking their dogs when they were ambushed in broad daylight by Joanna. She inflicted over 40 wounds on both men, but incredibly they both survived. The West Mercia police were called to the scene and a chase was on. It didn't take them long to catch up to the car Joanna and her accomplices were traveling in. During the arrest, Joanna was bizarrely calm, still holding the blade she had used to attack the 2 men. While being booked at the police station, Joanna began to flirt with the booking officer and complained her signature looked dodgy. After Joanna was arrested, police conducted a thorough search of her home and discovered 2 more bodies. The British public was shocked when details of Joanna's crimes and arrest were made public. Women are not often viewed as perpetrators of serious crimes, but there have been many high-profile instances where this has been the case across the UK. In November of 2013, after just 10 minutes of being at her pre-trial hearing, Joanna Denny pled guilty to 5 counts. She showed no emotion and admitted she was dangerous and would do it again if she was released. Joanna has made headlines since she was sentenced to a whole-life tariff in 2014. When she was sentenced, she laughed at the judge. Joanna was initially sent to HMP Bronzefield, another women's prison in England, but was transferred in 2019. Hours after being transferred, Joanna found herself in the headlines when it emerged that she'd threatened to take the life of Rose West, another notorious female serial killer. Joanna had also been engaged to fellow prisoner Haley Palmer, but the two broke it off after Joanna wrote a letter to Haley in which she admitted to being a fully disturbed psychopath. Criminologists and psychologists believe Joanna suffers from a myriad of personality disorders and mental health conditions. Antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy have been named the likely candidates, and Joanna continues to receive counseling and therapy while imprisoned. For the safety of other inmates, Joanna's contact with them is limited, as prison officers don't doubt that she wouldn't hesitate to act on her dark desires. HMP Belmarsh may be one of Britain's youngest prisons, but in its short life, Belmarsh has picked up a solid reputation. According to the Metro newspaper, there were over 200 recorded incidents of violence in an 11-month period at HMP Belmarsh in 2022. HMP Belmarsh represents the worst of society, and it's often been dubbed the British Guantanamo Bay due to allegations of human rights abuses. The staff at Belmarsh are no strangers to the press, and over the years, many hardened criminals have walked through its doors. In 1991, the British government officially opened HMP Belmarsh in London. From its inception, Belmarsh was a Category A prison, holding the British judicial system's most violent and dangerous offenders. Belmarsh's reputation as a hostile environment is backed up not just by word of mouth, but reported incidents. British tabloid newspapers requested information about violent incidents that occurred in the prison in 2021, and bizarrely, the prison refused to release official reports. It's only due to a Freedom of Information Act request that the press gained access to a heavily redacted version of the report. According to the Metro, in one incident, a prisoner had been attacked by another and was found with a ligature made out of a bedsheet around his neck. When prison staff discovered what was happening, the victim was unconscious and turning blue. This is just one of many violent incidents reported at Belmarsh. Ex-inmates have spoken of being attacked with makeshift weapons made from melted toothbrushes and other household items. Prisoners don't just attack one another, and according to the Metro, there were at least 182 reported assaults against staff between 2020 and 2022. In 2007, HMP Belmarsh found itself in the news once again. Within Belmarsh is another jail of sorts, at the ultra-high security wing. This wing is reserved for the most dangerous and threatening inmates, many of whom are a threat to national security. According to reports, prisoners on this wing were given laptops to complete legal work. However, their internet access had been restricted. One inmate, who's not been named, was unhappy with this and allegedly began tampering with it. When prison officers discovered what he was doing, he was ordered to hand over the laptop, but he refused. After refusing, he also punched a prison officer, causing a commotion. Details about the attack are scant, but reports indicate that at least 4 officers required hospital treatment. Violent scuffles are the norm at HMP Belmarsh, and the British government has been working hard to eradicate this behavior. Former inmates who have spoken to the press dispute this, saying violent behavior is placated instead of stamped out. Charles Bronson, a notorious and outlandish criminal, is the most well-known prisoner to be held behind HMP Belmarsh's doors. While Bronson has most of the spotlight over Belmarsh, there's another prisoner who's just as terrifying: Delroy Grant. Born in Jamaica in 1957, Delroy moved to the UK when he was just 15 years old. Delroy settled into his new life in a matter of months, and once he was comfortable with his new surroundings of southeast London, he became unstoppable. As a young adult, Delroy was picked up for minor offenses such as burglary. His behavior went uncorrected, as at the time, the British prison system did not place much emphasis on rehabilitation as it did on punishment. In the mid-1970s, Delroy did a stint inside for armed robbery, but was let loose within a matter of years. In 1975, Delroy married Janet Watson, and the two enjoyed marital bliss. Behind closed doors, Delroy was a different man, one who placed violence above everything else. In 1991, the relationship between Delroy and Janet had broken down. He had met a new woman, Jennifer Edwards, and the two moved to Brockley in southeast London. For the last 20 years, Delroy had been in and out of prison on a myriad of offenses, and each sentence only fueled his animalistic rage. Finally, in 1992, the real Delroy Grant emerged, and women in southeast London were no longer safe. Between 1992 and 2009, it's believed Delroy Grant was responsible for assaulting at least 80 women, although these estimates are conservative. Delroy was dubbed the Night Stalker and plunged parts of London into fear for decades. In 1992, the Metropolitan Police responded to an incident in Croydon, South London, where an 89-year-old woman had been attacked. Her attacker left behind his DNA, but to the dismay of the police, his DNA was not on file. For years, the Metropolitan Police followed the Night Stalker, waiting for him to attack again. But each time a call came in, he was gone by the time they made it to the scene. Finally, in 2009, Delroy Grant was arrested and charged with dozens of counts of assault, theft, and burglary. Delroy specifically targeted elderly women who lived alone as they were the least able to defend themselves. Delroy stole their jewelry and other valuables and even used their credit cards to withdraw money. With a mountain of evidence against him, Delroy knew the walls were closing in. In 2011, he was sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences, along with a slew of additional years for other crimes. Delroy Grant was transferred to HMP Belmarsh, where he remains today. Delroy Grant maintains his innocence, despite the sheer amount of evidence against him. He's housed with other inmates who've committed similar crimes for his own protection. While his crimes are shocking, many in the UK have never heard of the man that they call the Night Stalker. In the sleepy village of Crowthorne, Berkshire, lies Broadmore Hospital. But Broadmore isn't like any other hospital in the area. Those transferred to Broadmore are rarely allowed to leave through the front doors, and will likely never experience freedom again. Broadmore is not just a hospital, but a hospital for the criminally insane. Some of the UK's most dangerous people, including gangsters and serial killers, have found themselves in this institution. In 1863, the Broadmore Criminal Lunatic Asylum officially opened its doors. Those deemed the worst of the worst were confined behind the bars at Broadmore and suffered unimaginable treatment. In the 1800s, attitudes to mental health disorders were a far cry from what they are today, and the mentally ill were vilified and outcast from society. It's likely patients at Broadmore were tortured, neglected, and subjected to inhumane treatments such as ECT. By 1912, Broadmore had become overrun with patients, causing conditions to be worse. Many patients were described as feeble-minded and were left to their own devices for much of the day. Disturbingly, Broadmore also served as a prisoner of war camp during the First World War. The part of the hospital that was sectioned off for the army held captured German soldiers who were deemed mentally unwell. Broadmore's disturbing history runs deep, and many believe parts of the grounds to be haunted. In 2007, Broadmore transferred all of their female patients to other facilities, and today only men are admitted for treatment. Despite the large NHS sign at the front, Broadmore is often mistaken for a traditional prison, and with the looming walls and barbed wire fences, it's easy to see why. According to the British press, around 240 criminally insane male patients are currently being treated at Broadmore. The prison hospital has garnered a fierce reputation in the UK, and its name is synonymous with insane and dangerous. Those imprisoned at Broadmore often have personality disorders or severe mental health conditions, like schizophrenia. Patients are given therapies and treatment daily, along with rehabilitation care. Once a patient is known to not pose a risk to themselves or others, they're transferred to a traditional prison to serve the remainder of their sentence. Over the years, Broadmore has been home to the infamous East End gangster Ronnie Cray, Robert Maudsley, the real-life Hannibal Lecter, Graham Young, the Teacup Prisoner, and Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe is one of the most infamous serial killers in British history, and his name brings terror to certain parts of the country. Born to parents John and Kathleen in 1946 in West Yorkshire, Peter had a normal upbringing. His father John would later tell the press his son was kind, timid, and preferred to be around his mother. During adolescence, Peter developed an obsession with street workers and would travel to Leeds to watch them. For many years, he didn't engage, instead choosing to watch them from afar. His obsession soon entwined itself with hatred and disdain. Some reports indicate that Peter began attacking street workers in the late 1960s. On October 30th, 1975, 30-year-old Wilma McCann would be the first woman to lose her life to Peter Sutcliffe. As would become his pattern, Peter engaged Wilma in conversation before reaching for his weapon, a hammer. Peter attacked his victims from behind, catching them by surprise. Wilma suffered horrific injuries at the hands of Peter, with over 15 puncture wounds on her body. The West Yorkshire police were alerted to the discovery of Wilma's body, but as would become the norm, the West Yorkshire police put little effort into the investigation. Wilma McCann was not a street worker, but her body was found in the area where they operated, and to the police this signaled that she was lesser than. In the UK, attitudes towards street workers, especially by the police, were that of disdain and disregard. If a worker was attacked, many believed they deserved it, which was part of their line of work. Between 1975 and 1980, Peter Sutcliffe took the lives of at least 13 women and attacked dozens more. His job as a truck driver took him all over Yorkshire, leading to him picking up the name the Yorkshire Ripper. The local press were also uninterested in the spate of crimes facing them, as the victims were street workers. It wasn't until Peter Sutcliffe began taking the lives of what the press dubbed normal women that anybody started to take notice. Several young women came forward, claiming to have been attacked by a strange man while working or walking alone at night. These survivor accounts gave the police small crumbs of evidence to work with. His crimes took him across Yorkshire and the north of England, signaling his job involved travel. Police departments across Yorkshire began to ramp up their investigation into the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, and in 1981, Peter Sutcliffe made a fatal mistake. One evening in January of 1981, Peter was in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, when he picked up Olivia Reevers. The South Yorkshire police were known to patrol parts of Sheffield where girls worked, especially amid the Ripper being loose. As officers drove past Sutcliffe, they noticed his car's number plates were fake and decided to take him in for further questioning. A quick search of his car revealed a plethora of weapons. Within a day of being held, Peter Sutcliffe cracked and confessed to taking the lives of at least a dozen women. He went into disturbing details about his crimes, sending chills down the spines of investigators. News of his arrest lit the media on fire, and soon criticisms of systems meant to protect women flooded in. The trial of Peter Sutcliffe was heavily broadcast and politicized, leading to law reforms and reforms of attitudes towards women. The trial, both legal and by the media of West Yorkshire, is one that warrants its own video entirely. At trial, Sutcliffe's defense produced psychiatric evaluations to prove he had paranoid schizophrenia. In late 1981, Peter Sutcliffe was found guilty on multiple counts and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, a rarity in the UK. Sutcliffe was hit with a whole-life tariff, meaning he'll never be released. Due to his mental health condition, Sutcliffe was ordered to serve his sentence at Broadmore Hospital until he was deemed well enough to enter the general prison population. In 2016, Sutcliffe was moved from Broadmore Hospital to HMP Frankland in Durham, almost 300 miles away. According to staff, Sutcliffe was no longer suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and was able to enter a traditional prison. Disturbingly, Sutcliffe would make the news shortly after his transfer for all the wrong reasons. Sutcliffe claimed during a seance that he'd made contact with his victims, who told him that they forgive him. On November 13, 2020, Peter Sutcliffe passed away, leaving behind a trail of terror and tears. Despite its reputation for its beautiful beaches and a more idyllic lifestyle, Hawaii is one of the most haunted states in the United States. The history of the island chain goes back more than 1,000 years, with the Polynesians first arriving in around the year 500. Since then, a distinct culture in Hawaii blossomed, which came with its own paranormal entities that explained certain aspects of how the world worked. Besides the gods and other traditional spirits, there are many other ghosts, ghouls, and mysterious creatures that are said to inhabit parts of the island. Hawaii is home to haunted roads, hotels, and even an entire haunted village. But it's said that the most haunted place in the state is the Kasha House of Kaimuki. A kasha is a Japanese paranormal entity, described as being something like a ghoul in nature. Kasha translates to burning chariot. In the Japanese Middle Ages, the kasha was literally a burning chariot, which would take the bodies of wicked people to hell. Later versions of the creature describe it as looking like a typical house cat, until it was time for work to be done. Then the cat would transform into a humanoid cat creature, which may have had a burning tail pushing the chariot. Other versions of the story say the kasha is just a typical oni pushing the chariot. Whatever the creature looks like, one thing remains the same in all the stories. It takes the bodies or souls of wicked people to hell. In some versions, it consumes the bodies and it tends to linger around graveyards or other places where the deceased gather. How exactly this Japanese spirit came to be associated with the simple house in the Kaimuki district of Honolulu isn't clear. The naming stuck though, and the site is now one of the most infamous haunted locations in the state. Kaimuki is a residential neighborhood in Honolulu that sits near the volcanic tuff cone of Diamond Head. It's been described as a hot neighborhood and a scenic place to live, with picturesque boutiques. It's also one of the oldest neighborhoods in the area. Interestingly, it was once the site of a carnation farm that grew funeral flowers. If this had any influence on attracting the Kasha, it wouldn't be until years after the farm was replaced by residential housing seen today that this impact would be seen. The first verified story of the Kasha, or the spirit that would become known as Kasha, dates back to 1942. Police were called to a property in Kaimuki by neighbors who were concerned by shouts coming from the house. They thought someone inside the home was trying to hurt the family. When police arrived, they found a woman screaming that someone was trying to hurt her family. Inside, the police found the woman's 2 adult daughters and son sitting on the sofa and screaming. The police watched as they were attacked by an unseen force, levitated, and then thrown around the room. The mother was sprinkling Hawaiian salt in tea leaves on the children. This is a method that is said to ward off ghosts, but it was apparently ineffective in this case. The police eventually managed to get the family out of the house and escort them to the nearby woman's sister's home. The mother explained that her son had described smelling the creature. After drawing attention to it, the creature attacked him before moving on to his sisters. She blamed her husband, who had abandoned the family. The story apparently made headlines in local newspapers for several days, and at least one story from the account survives. The next story, said to be associated with the Kasha House, was printed in October of 1972, in a collection of ghost stories that were said to have happened. When exactly this story is said to have occurred isn't specified, but 3 young women were staying at the house when they began to feel as if something else was there with them. They would hear noises that couldn't be explained, and feel hands grasp at them. They called police and asked for the officer to follow them to the home of one of their mothers, having decided that it wasn't worth staying at the house anymore. The officer agreed, and 3 women piled into one car while the officer followed behind. At one point, the women pulled into the parking lot of a store, and the officer noticed that one of the women appeared to be wrestling with something he couldn't see. He got out of the car and went to help her, only to be grabbed by something he couldn't see. He described the hand as calloused, and it had a lot of strength. It twisted his arm, and he had to remove it from the vehicle. He took the woman that was being attacked and placed her in his car. The attack stopped, and it seemed as if they might be able to make it to their destination without any more trouble. But the police car wouldn't start with the woman inside. As soon as the woman was placed back into the first car, the struggle started again. It wasn't until the officer sprayed everyone with water and salt that the creature left. It's not specified in the newspaper article whether these 2 events took place at the same house, but according to the legend, it was the Kasha House. The Kasha House is believed to have been a simple 2-story house sitting on the corner of 8th and Harding. There was nothing from the outside that made it appear to be any different from any of the neighbors' homes. So when a Japanese couple moved in 1977, they couldn't have expected anything strange to happen. On their first night in the house, the woman woke up at midnight to see a ghostly figure floating in midair. It had no arms or legs and didn't seem threatening, but was still terrifying. The wife tried to wake her husband, but by the time he was awake, it had vanished. A priest suggested that they make an offering of bread and water to the spirit every night. The couple did and had no more midnight visits. The house was torn down in 2016, and a duplex was built in its place. According to at least one resident, the paranormal activity has continued, though it's nowhere near as terrifying as the earliest stories. The resident described how once every 3 months or so, they would wake up to their room being extremely cold. It would be about 60 degrees, a temperature their AC couldn't even reach. They felt an extreme cold in their chest and the feeling of being watched. When they managed to get out of the room, they would look back and feel something distinctly sinister emanating from it. It was supposedly just that room, so it's possible the original spirit has been focused on that one space now. The cause for the spirit and what it is remains a mystery. The haunted house has no more a dark history than really any other house in the area, but it's this one that the neighbors are certain is haunted. One theory states that a Japanese man took the lives of his entire family on the property, and the body of one of the victims was never found. Perhaps the body attracted the spirit. Another story says that a man took the life of his lover and her girlfriend on the property in a fit of anger and jealousy that may have left its mark on the house decades later. The truth about the haunted house and the creature may never be known, but given the entity seems to have stayed attached despite the entire house being demolished, it's probably safer not to take up residence here. Number 1 La Veta Place in New York made history as the first legally recognized haunted house in the United States. The 7-bedroom home was built in the 1800s, but the ghosts that are said to still reside there date back even later than that. La Veta Place is a quiet, tree-lined street that reaches from North Broadway to the Hudson River. Number 1 sits at the end of the street, closest to the river, and many of the rooms in the house have views of the river and the nearby bridge. The home was occupied all the way up until the end of the 1950s. It's believed that the family that once lived in the house still lives in the area today, but their names have been forgotten. In the 1600s, it was empty for almost a decade before being bought by Helen and George Ackley in 1967. By that point, the house was already looking every part of haunted. The front lawn was overgrown, tiles were falling from the roof, and the neighborhood children were certain the house was haunted. Some of the neighborhood children told Helen Ackley this as she was moving into the property. She brushed it off as just a story the children believed. It was likely their parents had warned them of ghosts to stop them from trying to explore the abandoned house. It wasn't as hard to brush off the next warning about the paranormal, though. There was still work going on at the house, and a plumber working at the property told Helen about the strange footsteps he'd been hearing. He'd heard someone go up and down the stairs and in the rooms on the upper floors, but when he would go to check, he'd find nobody there. George Ackley, who had been living in the house while his wife moved their belongings from their previous home, was already convinced the house was haunted and asked for the light to be left on as they slept. The spooky activity didn't stop the Ackleys from moving in. They and their 4 children lived on the property for about 20 years. Paranormal activity included windows and doors being opened without anyone there, light fixtures swaying and then suddenly stopping, and the uneasy feeling that something or someone was standing in an empty space. The most disturbing activity happened to their eldest daughter, Cynthia, who was a teenager at the time. Even as an adult, Cynthia would continue to recount the same experience she had while living in the La Veta home. She would be awoken at the same time every morning by her bed being shaken. If she didn't get out of bed, the shaking would only increase. She told her mother that she didn't mind the shaking, as it was a relatively reasonable time and was almost a convenient alarm clock. She just hoped that she'd be able to get a lie-in during the school vacation. On the night before the first day of vacation, she calmly and politely explained the situation to the unseen entity that had been shaking her bed. It seemed to understand, as the shaking didn't happen during the holidays. Cynthia wasn't the only one to experience the bed shaking, though she felt it most often. She also saw the ghost on at least one occasion, describing a hooded figure she believed to be a woman. It didn't have any malice against her or the rest of the family. For Helen, most of her experiences with the ghosts consisted of feeling as if there was someone else there. On one occasion, this manifested as a full-bodied apparition. It occurred when Helen was painting the living room for the first time. While painting, she described that feeling of being watched. Unsurprisingly, when she turned, she found nobody else in the room. She went back to painting and asked the entity if it approved of their interior decorating choice. When she turned back again, she saw the ghost of an elderly man that she described as the most cheerful and solid-looking person she'd ever seen. He wore a blue suit with white ruffles at his wrist and neck. He had pants cut to his knees, a white hose, and black pumps with buckles. The outfit dated him closer to the 1790s than the 1890s when the house was built. The ghost was sitting back in a chair and nodded approvingly. It seemed that whoever he was and however he was attached to the house, he did like their design choices. George also saw an apparition, though it appeared to him as he was coming up the steps from the basement, and he only caught a glimpse of a moccasin-style shoe. Many of the visitors that the Ackleys had to their home experienced the doors and windows opening and heard footsteps that couldn't be explained. The Ackleys were never concerned about their supernatural roommates, and would simply calmly ask the ghosts to stop. The only person outside the Ackleys' immediate family to see the ghost themselves was the wife of Helen's cousin who came to stay with them. After the first night, she reported seeing a man standing in front of the French doors overlooking the river. He was wearing a long coat and a powdered wig. Why Revolutionary War ghosts chose to haunt this particular property is a mystery, though there were several skirmishes in the area during the war. The Hudson River was an important factor in the war, and fighting took place in and around the area. For a little over 20 years, the Ackleys lived in harmony with the ghosts, but in the late 1980s, they decided it was time to downsize. The house was on the market for a few years before Jeffrey and Patrice Stembovsky decided to buy the property. According to Helen and the agent helping to sell the property, Helen told the Stembovskys about the ghosts that haunted the old home. She had made no secret of the haunted house before and even wrote an article in Reader's Digest in 1970 about her family's experiences. According to the Stembovskys, the mention of the haunting was only made in passing, and it wasn't until a contractor talked about the haunted history that they understood the reputation their new home had. They pulled out of the purchase and requested their down payment back. The most recent occupants of the house have reported no paranormal activity, though the realty agent who helped sell the property most recently did report feeling uneasy in the basement of the building. It's possible that the ghosts haunting the property are just waiting for the right person to come into possession of the house before starting up all over again. Compared to other houses on this list, the Dolly Mansion is relatively modern. It was only built in 1889 and was remodeled multiple times over the years, most recently in 1910. Given the recent history, it's not surprising that there are a few ghosts that are believed to reside in the mansion, but it remains one of the most paranormal locations in Hamilton, Montana. The house was originally owned by Marcus Dolly and his wife, Margaret. Marcus had effectively created the town of Hamilton from scratch. After moving to the United States from Ireland as a teenager, Marcus had gradually risen up the ranks in the mining industry. Marcus had an eye for copper ore and urged his employers to buy the Anaconda mine in Montana. It was a silver mine at the time, but Marcus recognized the potential for copper. When his employers refused to buy it, Marcus did. The copper mines had a smelter that required a lot of timber every day, so Marcus built a sawmill in the nearby Bitterroot Valley, and the town of Hamilton sprang up around it. In 1886, Dolly purchased the home of Anthony Chafin, and the next 3 years were spent building it up into a mansion. Remarkably, this 50-room mansion was just a summer home for the family, and they spent the rest of the year elsewhere. Margaret Dolly particularly loved the house, though. In 1897, it was remodeled into a Queen Anne Victorian home, perfect for the entertaining and dinner party hosting Margaret enjoyed. It wasn't long before the couple started talking about remodeling again, this time into a Georgian revival-style home. But before that remodeling could begin, Marcus Dolly passed away. It was November of 1900, and he was away on business in New York City. His bad heart and diabetes would take his life at just 58 years old. Margaret continued to split her time between the Montana mansion, which the family called Riverside, and the winter home. The remodeling eventually took place, and the mansion finally came to look how it looks today. It had 25 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms, a music room, a sunroom, and a trophy room. Margaret was very particular about the house and continued to enjoy hosting dinner parties and entertaining guests at the mansion as she grew old. She also had extensive gardens and particularly liked roses. During the summer months, it wasn't uncommon for a bouquet of various colored roses to be found in every room of the house. She would precisely plan entertainment activities for her guests, which often included horseback riding. When her grandchildren were around, she would read to them before bedtime. It was obvious that Margaret took great pride in the mansion and in Hamilton as a whole. She donated land for a library and a hospital to be built. It would be at Riverside where she passed away in 1941 at the age of 88. She was predeceased by 2 of her 4 children. Both are believed to have passed away due to similar heart complications as their father. Marcus Dolly, II, the couple's only son, allegedly passed away on a hunting trip in November of 1930, a few days before the anniversary of his father's passing. Some believe that Marcus was more responsible for his own passing than the official story dictates. The Dolly family curse continued on to Marcus's son, also named Marcus. Marcus III passed away in November of 1970 at the age of 50. After Margaret passed away, the house lay empty. Margaret still had 2 living children and many grandchildren, but none wanted to take on the estate. After the war, Margaret's granddaughter came to live at the estate but had chosen not to live in the mansion, preferring to remodel one of the smaller buildings on the property. The doors of the Dolly mansion remained closed, with the contents inside continuing to gather dust. When this grandchild, Margaret Dolly Segre, passed away, her heirs couldn't continue with the upkeep due to taxes on their inheritance. In the 1980s, Margaret's son led a local group that formed the Dolly Mansion Preservation Trust. The trust brought up many of the heirlooms that had been left, abandoned on the property, and took over caring for the mansion itself when it was bought by the state. Work got underway to make the mansion suitable for visitors. One of the artifacts that was bought by the trust was a print of a painting. It featured a church cardinal listening to a pianist and violinist while drinking tea. Margaret Dolly had hung this painting in the living room, but decorators believed it was better suited for the music room, given its theme. The painting was hung up there, only for workers to return the next morning to find it sitting on the floor. It wasn't damaged in any way, indicating it hadn't fallen but had been placed there. It was hung up again, only for the same thing to happen again. Decorators figured it would be better to hang the painting in its original location, and once placed there, it didn't fall over again. It was pretty evident to the managers of the property that one of the Dollys, likely Margaret, still resided at the property, even though she no longer lived there. The painting would again become the focus of paranormal activity in December of 1990. A special Christmas event was going to be put on, and redecorating was in place. Once again, decorators thought they had a better location for the painting than the one Margaret had chosen. It was placed in the dining room, which had to be painted red for the occasion. While the painting managed to stay on the wall this time, there were a number of other strange happenings. A mouse ate important decorating equipment. The Christmas tree fell over, and the automatic lights failed to work. The painting was returned to the living room after the event and has remained there ever since. The house is open to visitors to this day, with many having strange and paranormal experiences. The ghost or ghosts of the Dolly Mansion appear to be friendly, but there are many who would prefer not to tempt fate. Savannah, Georgia is often listed as one of the most haunted cities in the United States. Established in 1733, it's seen numerous conflicts, diseases, and tragedies that have left their marks on the city. While it seems almost every building in Savannah has a ghost story to go along with it, none are more haunted than the Marshall House. Marshall House now stands as the oldest hotel in Savannah, and one of the oldest hotels in the city. It still welcomes guests and offers a business center, restaurant, and event reception, as well as traditional hotel rooms. But almost every room has a haunted story attached to it, and it's warned that the Marshall House is not for the faint of heart. The house opened in 1851 during the boom for Savannah. The population of the city had doubled in the span of just 20 years, and it was a popular destination for travelers. Mary Marshall opened the hotel for travelers built on land she had inherited from her father, and created one of the best places to stay in the city. Over the next century, the hotel remained one of the most luxurious places to stay. It temporarily closed a few times to install electricity and hot and cold running water in all the rooms. It was the best place to stay and attracted the likes of writer Joel Chandler Harris. Of course, the hotel wasn't immune to the history going on in Georgia during its operation. In 1854, not long after it first opened, a yellow fever epidemic gripped the city. This was only 34 years after an epidemic of the disease had wiped out a tenth of Savannah's population. The Marshall House was converted into a hospital to treat the sick. It would serve the same purpose in 1876 when the fever struck again and took the lives of more than 1,000 residents of the city. The hotel was caught up in the Civil War as well. Savannah was the last stop in Sherman's march to the sea in the winter of 1864. It had previously been held by Confederate forces and was an important part of their trade and transportation network. It was captured by the Union Army on December 21st after a devastating campaign by William Tecumseh Sherman. For the remainder of the war, the Marshall House served as a hospital for Union soldiers. It was during this period that some of the darkest acts that were later imprinted on the hotel took place. Many soldiers who came to the hospital wouldn't leave alive. Others lost arms or legs and would have their lives changed forever by what had happened to them. It's believed that the spirits of many of these soldiers remain at the hotel today. The hotel closed in the 1950s due to fire regulations, but was reopened in 1999 after extensive renovations. Despite these renovations, efforts were made to preserve what they could, with much of the brickwork being original, as well as the central staircase that greets visitors when they enter the hotel. Many of the artifacts that were found during renovation work are now put on display, but not all the finds were suitable for the public to see. One legend surrounding the hotel is that during renovations, workers pulled up floorboards to find skeletal human remains. The police were called, believing this may have been the scene of some long-forgotten crime. Lab results showed that the remains actually dated back to the Civil War period. It also wasn't entire bodies that had been placed under the floor. Instead, it was believed that this was the area used to bury limbs that had been removed from wounded soldiers during the war. These soldiers have been frequently seen by guests, who report seeing people in Civil War period clothing, many of them missing limbs and looking for doctors to help them. It's believed that the operations took place on the 4th floor, as this was the furthest from the public. Today, that floor is considered to be the most haunted of them all. In particular, room 414 is said to be chilling. During renovations, workers found that there was a terrible or evil smell coming from rooms 214, 314, and 414. They tried all the cleaning and air freshening techniques they could, but the smell wouldn't go away. In the end, the group tried a group prayer, which managed to get the smell to leave the 2 lower floors. 414 still remained tarnished, however. Today, the evil smell is frequently experienced by guests. Cleaners will often play gospel music to keep the smell at bay for a time, but it always comes back. Not all the hauntings are as dark or as visual. Most haunting experiences consist of the sounds of footsteps, even when it would be impossible for anybody to make them, or faucets turning on and off by themselves. Guests also report the ghosts of children being seen, heard, or felt around the hotel. Sometimes this is as simple as an unexplained baby crying. Most commonly, guests will hear the sound of marbles or rubber balls being rolled or bounced around in the hallway. When they go to see what it is, there's nobody there. This is sometimes accompanied by the sound of children running up and down the halls, or a family talking loudly. The paranormal phenomenon often takes place in the middle of the night, and many guests have been woken up by this strange paranormal activity. While most of the ghosts do seem to be friendly, or do not even realize that they're no longer alive, the hotel should be avoided by anyone who doesn't want a paranormal intrusion into their vacation. Sweetwater Mansion is a nearly 200-year-old home in Florence, Alabama, that's said to be home to a series of strange ghosts and other paranormal activity. The house has fallen into a state of disrepair in recent years, and access is strictly prohibited. The few that have managed to conduct investigations on the property have come up with some disturbing finds. The mansion was built between 1828 and 1836 and designed by General John Bryan, a veteran of the War of 1812. The bricks used in the mansion were made from clay from the nearby river, earning the mansion its name, and Bryan spent the saved money importing materials from Europe. Bryan would pass away the year before the mansion was complete, and it was inherited by his son-in-law, Robert Patton. Patton would later go on to become the governor of Alabama after the Civil War. The house consists of 4 rooms downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs, as well as a guest room and 5 rooms in the basement. From the outside, it seems like an ordinary house, albeit run down and out of the way. It can only be accessed by a gravel driveway that leads from Sweetwater Avenue, past no trespassing signs. But on the inside, there's more paranormal activity than possibly anywhere in Alabama, and the history to go along with it. The basement is a focus of much of the paranormal activity, so much so that the door to the basement has been sealed shut, according to the account of one ghost hunting group in 2022. The basement once housed a hospital, used during the Civil War. No doubt many people lost their lives here, and it's possible one or more have remained behind. As well as the 5 rooms that were once accessible before the basement was sealed, there's believed to be another mystery room that lies beneath the main floor of the house. It was visible through an exterior window, but there was no way to get into the room from inside the house. According to some, there were even objects that looked like coffins just visible through the window. One of the stories that comes from the mansion is that of William Billy Patton, the son of Robert Patton. He volunteered to serve in the Confederacy during the Civil War and lost his life in battle. His body was brought back to Sweetwater Mansion, where his funeral service was held. Some stories also claimed that Billy's brother also took his life in the war. Their mother was so distraught that she couldn't let her sons be buried conventionally. They were either buried beneath the floor of the mystery room or their coffins were stored there. It's believed that Billy is one of the spirits that haunt the house today. EVP devices have caught him saying his name as well as the phrase, "I'm here." Another dark story that comes from the house concerns one of the upstairs bedrooms. It's alleged that a group of women were locked in the room by Union soldiers. Their experience was so traumatic that it seems to have left a lasting impact on the house. It's reported that many female visitors and even female caretakers have been locked in the room by an unseen entity. It's also in the back bedroom that a lot of the paranormal activity is focused. During the 2022 investigation by the Southern Ghost Girls Tour, the group was in the back bedroom when they heard the distinctive sound of someone or something growling. They couldn't explain it at the time, but they got the impression that this wasn't a ghost that wanted them there. There are rumors that black magic was performed in this bedroom. While the stories have no evidence, it might explain why the house has attracted the attention of more ghosts than others from the time period. The black magic may explain the mysterious portal that's said to exist on the staircase. While the portal isn't visual and hasn't been as well documented in stories about the Sweetwater Mansion as other apparitions have, it's said that some kind of doorway to the unknown exists in the front hall. Many investigators have felt the presence of the portal, and strange photographs have been taken in the area. Other ghosts seen or experienced at the mansion include those of small children. It's believed that children were kept at the house for their own safety during the war, and they're sometimes heard laughing even when there are no children around. There's also said to be a woman known as the Humming Woman or the Singing Woman, who's been heard by multiple paranormal investigators. As her name would suggest, the woman can be heard humming. It's said that the tune is a happy one. Who this woman is remains a mystery. Given the only other story about Jane Locke Patton, Billy's mother, showed her being unable to cope with the loss of her sons, it seems unlikely that this is Jane. Other paranormal activity includes doors opening and closing by themselves and other poltergeist activity. The house has been featured on multiple TV shows, including Paranormal State. By far, the most famous story from the mansion is that of the Phantom Coffin. The story states that one of the caretakers of the house came downstairs one day to find an open coffin in the living area. She got closer and discovered the body of a Confederate soldier inside. Then it faded away and vanished, never to be seen again. This is believed to be a ghostly afterimage of Billy Patton's funeral. If Jane Patton was unable to let her son go, it would make sense for this memory to be one that she held onto, and may have imprinted on the house unknowingly. While there have been some limited paranormal investigations at the property, it's possible that there's much more to discover, and some of the strange mysteries may be explained with more examination. Unfortunately, the state of the house means that it's not safe to be open to the public. A report on the 2022 investigation stated that the floorboards have been damaged so significantly that it's possible to fall into the boarded-up basement. No trespassing rules are enforced, so it's not advised for any urban explorers to go check out this house without permission, no matter how much people may want to get to the bottom of this strange and mysterious haunting. Throughout human history, there have only been 6 so-called pristine civilizations. These civilizations were created without the influence of other civilizations, and are sometimes called the cradles of humanity. The most famous of these is likely ancient Egypt, along with ancient Sumeria. Further east, there was the Indus Valley civilization and ancient China. The Americas also had 2 pristine civilizations, the Carl Supe civilization in Peru and the Olmecs. Despite being around for about 1,000 years, the Olmec civilization in modern-day Mexico is one of the most mysterious civilizations that has ever been discovered. The people had a huge impact on later cultures in Central America, but they also left behind many mysteries, including what they even called themselves. The most famous of these mysteries is the Olmec colossal heads. The colossal heads can tell us a little about the Olmecs, but also leave us with many questions. The Olmec civilization originated around 1600 BC in what's today the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco. 3 major cities have been uncovered in the region, with the most important being San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan. La Venta in the east and Tres Zapotes in the west showed the extent of the civilization. We know they likely originated from farming communities, and farming was still an important part of daily life for most Olmec people. But archaeologists believed they also had a ruling class and a shaman class. They had a religious system which featured at least 8 gods that have been identified in artwork. The Olmecs also practiced the Mesoamerican ball game, something that was later passed on to other civilizations and lasted all the way up until the arrival of Europeans. The Olmecs wouldn't make it that long. In around 400 BC, the civilization began to decline, then disappeared altogether for unknown reasons. While many of their cultures seemed to be passed on to neighboring and seceding civilizations, things like their writing system disappeared. It wouldn't be until the 1860s that modern historians rediscovered the Olmec civilization, and it was the first colossal head that triggered the rediscovery. The first colossal head was discovered at Tres Zapotes in the 1950s. Farmers were clearing away an area where they uncovered the top of one of these heads. At first, they believed it to be a large upturned cauldron, but when they dug around the stone, they discovered something much more mysterious and amazing. The giant stone head was roughly 1.5 meters tall and had the same width and length. Carved into the volcanic basalt rock was the face of a person with a wide nose, full lips, and a prominent chin. It also seemed to be wearing a helmet or some other kind of headgear. Even after it had been uncovered and brought to the attention of archaeologists a few years later, the significance of the find wasn't clear. More artifacts would later be uncovered, showing distinct differences in art styles to the other civilizations that were known to occupy the area. But at first, it was believed that they originated from the Maya people. Gradually, as more artifacts were found, scholars began to realize this was a distinct civilization, and radiocarbon dating of some artifacts proved they predated the Mayan civilization. A total of 17 heads were discovered. All but one have been found in Mexico, in the heartlands of the Olmecs. The one found outside the country in Guatemala had been turned into a stone throne. Each head is different in some way. The faces all belong to people from the same civilization, but have differing facial features, headwear, and jewelry. The sizes also range, with the largest being about 3.4 meters in height. Who these heads were supposed to represent is a mystery, though archaeologists and experts have some ideas. At first, it was theorized that they may have been talented ball game players due to the headgear resembling helmets worn by players. However, experts now believe that these are actually the faces of rulers of the ancient civilization. The next big question is why they were created. The basalt rock used in the sculptures had to have originated 70 kilometers away. While the Olmecs were known to trade with people outside their civilization, such large balls of rock wouldn't have been the sort of thing traders would have brought to exchange with them. These were brought to the Olmec sites specifically for use in creating the colossal heads. Moving the rock over that distance in a time without the wheel would have been incredibly difficult. Even using wooden rollers would have been difficult due to the fact that most Olmec territory was marshland. The Olmecs also didn't have metal tools. The sculptures would have instead been made with stone tools, making it that much harder. With that much effort going into creating these sculptures, they must have had some significance. At the moment, the leading theory is that they were simply created to show the power of whoever commissioned them. This mystery may be one that we would be able to solve if we were able to understand the Olmec writing. Mesoamerica is one of the few places where writing developed independently. It wasn't until relatively recently that we discovered artifacts with Olmec script carved into them, and only a few pieces of this ancient writing have been discovered. The most famous was the Kasha House block, discovered in the 1990s in Veracruz. It featured 62 different glyphs and dates to about 900 BC. Some resemble maize or various animals, while others are abstract boxes. Experts believe the writing had syntax and grammar rules, making it a true writing system rather than proto-writing. But at the moment, it's impossible to decipher. Later civilizations like the Maya also had writing, but strangely it doesn't seem to be closely related to the Olmec scripts that we've discovered, making what was written on the Kasha block and other scraps of writing a mystery. The final mystery of the Olmec civilization is what happened to them. The Olmecs thrived until around 400 BC, when suddenly the population began to shrink. Artifacts were still being created at this point, but it seemed like older artifacts were being repurposed. For example, one of the later colossal heads was built out of a grand stone throne rather than new material. It's possible that was a sign that it wasn't safe to travel outside the Olmec heartland, or it simply meant that the person commissioning the head didn't have the same level of power as the people who had commissioned the older heads. Experts believe some kind of climate change may have been responsible for the rapid decline. This might have been caused by volcanic activity in the area. The Olmec civilization still depended on agriculture, and if their farmlands weren't producing the food needed to support the artisans, priests, and others who didn't contribute to actually growing the food, then the system would have broken down. It's likely people moved into other civilizations, which could have helped the Olmec culture take hold in later civilizations. While this theory does make sense, there's no evidence to prove it, and maybe a mystery that's never solved. Fortunately, new discoveries about the Olmecs are still being made. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs remained a mystery until the Rosetta Stone was found. While there was a lot more Egyptian writing for scholars to work with than we have Olmec writing, it's possible the next discovery could be the one that solves these mysteries. It can be hard to comprehend just how ancient much of what we think of as ancient Egypt actually is. When Greek historian Herodotus was writing about a trip to Hawara in the 5th century BC, the pyramid and structures there were already 1,000 years old. Now the site is 3 times as old and has even more mysteries that we may never know the answer to. When Herodotus wrote about Hawara, he described the pyramid built during the 19th century BC. But much more fascinating was the structure that lay in front of it, a great labyrinth and palace structure said to be the tomb of 12 builder kings. Herodotus went into great detail describing this incredible complex, which he claimed was more impressive and expensive than all the works of Greece. Herodotus described 12 courts, with 6 lining the north side of the complex and 6 lining the south. He claimed to have counted 3,000 rooms, both above ground and underground, and the whole complex was covered by a single stone slab. As Herodotus describes it, the labyrinth wasn't a literal maze. Instead, there were many corridors connecting the 3,000 rooms of various sizes, making it easy to get lost. He wasn't the only person to have written about such an incredible building. Many writers from ancient times visited the complex, which was still in use even 1,000 years after it had been built. All described a structure more impressive than anything they had seen before. Each room was covered in artwork and hieroglyphics which depicted various scenes. There were intricate carvings on the walls and columns that surrounded each of the courts or temples. Some of the other writers described the maze in the complex literally. A Roman writer from the 1st century described innumerable paths that seemed to cross one another and reverse direction along with ramps, as well as stairs. Despite the many writings about this awe-inspiring building, there seems to have been some debate about what it was for. Herodotus claims it was a tomb for what he called the 12 builder kings. Who these kings were supposed to be isn't specified, but Herodotus claims they all ruled at the same time, or at least came together to create the labyrinth, meaning that they weren't a succession of 12 rulers who ruled one after the other. Each king has a court, which is decorated with paintings and artwork that depicts their home. He also explained that he was not permitted to see the underground rooms, as this is where the kings were laid to rest. There was also a vault for sacred crocodiles on the underground level. The complex was located not far from the city of crocodiles. An underground vault for sacred crocodiles would make sense in this context. But that would not be the only purpose of the structure. According to various Greek writers, it was also a religious and governmental structure, where government officials, priests, and priestesses would gather for various purposes. It needed to be so big that all the officials across Egypt could gather there at the same time, and then the labyrinth was lost. How the labyrinth disappeared beneath the sands of Egypt is unclear. It may simply have been abandoned during later turmoil and then forgotten about. Some depictions of the labyrinth show the entire structure to be sunken, so the stone slab roof was at the same level as the base of the pyramid that it sat beside. If there was nobody to keep up with the upkeep, it would be easy for the sands to swallow this area. Others argue that it was dismantled and quarried during the period when Rome ruled Egypt. It isn't unknown for Romans to take apart even their own buildings to make something new, so this wouldn't have been out of character. By the time Egyptology took hold of Europe in the 19th century, even the location of the lost labyrinth had been forgotten. Hawara was discussed as a potential site, and various Egyptologists traveled there in search of the lost wonder. The pyramid was still visible, albeit not nearly as impressive as the Great Pyramids at Giza. There were also a few ruins to the south of the pyramid, which some believed might be the remains of the labyrinth. If that were the case, it couldn't have been nearly as impressive as the ancient writers had said. It was later learned that what may have been discovered was a Roman town that had been built much more recently. In 1888, the Egyptologist Flinders Petrie examined the site again and found, not far beneath the sand, a great stone slab. The slab was obviously artificially placed there. He believed that it was the foundation of the labyrinth complex, and the lost labyrinth had officially been found. It had obviously been an enormous site, but Egyptologists believe it had been destroyed in antiquity, before the Roman settlement was built in its place. The exact time of this is still debated, but the reign of Ptolemy II was a popular estimate. The mystery of the labyrinth was deemed solved for over 100 years, but modern Egyptologists believe there was more to this mystery than what had been discovered. Ancient writers had described the complex as being covered by a stone slab. It seemed possible that what Petrie believed was the foundation of the structure was actually the roof. It would be impossible to get through the stone without damaging the structure, so ground-penetrating radar was used to try to determine if there was anything beneath the stone. In 2008, the Mataha expedition was launched. It was a collaboration between Egypt authorities and Ghent University in Belgium. Without damaging the structure, a team of georadar specialists conducted extensive examinations of the area that Petrie had previously uncovered. What they found was amazing. There was evidence of walls and chambers beneath the stone. They were located at a depth of between 8 and 12 meters and formed a maze-like pattern. The results of the exhibition were published in 2008, but the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities stopped all communications about the labyrinth. They claimed it was for national security sanctions. The expedition group would eventually launch their own website in 2020 to share their findings and reveal what they had uncovered. The announcements made headlines around the world, but that would be the end of the story for research into the lost labyrinth. Archaeologists still haven't been able to go beneath the stone and find out what truly lies in the chambers that were found on the radar. It's not known if this is simply the underground layer Herodotus was not permitted to see, or the upper layer, with even more underneath. The paintings and artwork that are said to have lined the walls of the labyrinth could shed some light on what it was really used for, why it was such a confusing layout, and who the 12 kings actually were. Going beneath the surface might even reveal why it was abandoned at all. Adam's Calendar is the name given to one of the most mysterious and controversial stone circles ever discovered. According to conventional archaeology, the oldest known man-made structure is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, created between 9500 and 7500 BC. But according to some, there's a structure even older than this, and it's located in southern Africa. The mountains of eastern South Africa make a beautiful landscape of green hills and forested valleys. It was here that evidence for some of the earliest signs of life on the planet was found in the form of fossils that had been pushed up from the sea floor when the mountains were made millions of years ago. Dotted along the grasslands in the area are circular patterns, often connected by thin lines. They can best be made out from the air. They break up the vegetation slightly but aren't too imposing. On the ground, many of these cannot be made out, with the odd stone protruding from the ground in a vaguely circular shape. Others are clearly the remains of some buildings with slightly raised walls made of stone. It wouldn't be until 1918 that scholars wrote about these strange structures, which had long since been abandoned. It would be a few more decades until any investigation into the stone circles took place. There were more than 1,000 of them, apparently randomly placed in the area. It was believed that they'd been built by ancestors of the Petty people, who had lived in the area before European colonization. Later investigations concluded they were used for keeping livestock and farming terraces. While conventional archaeology accepted this answer, others weren't so sure. One of the main questions that came from this theory is why they were abandoned. There was still plenty of fertile land in the area, so it was unlikely that climate change had moved them on, as is often the case with other abandoned settlements. The structures were already in ruin by the time the Europeans came along, so it wasn't colonization that was the cause of their abandonment. The local people still created structures for keeping livestock, but rather than being made from rock, they were made from thorny bushes and were different in layout from the stone circles. The structures caught the attention of a pilot named Johann Hein in 2003. He spent a lot of time flying over the landscape and couldn't believe the explanation for the patterns that he found fascinating. He couldn't have come up with any other explanation, and wouldn't have were it not for a chance crash landing. Sources differ over whether it was Hein who crashed beside one of the stone circles or another pilot, and Hein had landed to help him. Whatever the case, Hein did land beside one of these circles in one of the most hard-to-reach areas of the mountains. This wasn't one of the well-built structures with still standing stone walls. It was only a few scattered rocks dug into the ground, but Hein was certain they were something special. The site was dubbed Adam's Calendar due to its alignment with the stars. Adam's Calendar has 2 central pillars of rock and about 17 other standing stones arranged around them in a circle. The 2 central pillars aren't in the exact center of the circle and are instead offset slightly to the north. According to Hines and others who have examined the site, the rocks around the edge of the circle mark the cardinal directions, as well as the point where the sun would set on the winter and summer solstice. The rocks in the center can be used as a sundial, while the location of certain shadows as the sunset would allow people to determine the time of year. There were a few other significant alignments, but not to stars today. Instead, when researchers compared the site to how the stars would have looked in 11,500 BC, they found near alignments for Orion's belt and Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Conventional archaeology states that the stone circles of South Africa are only roughly 500 years old. Hein and other believers in Adam's Calendar believe that they may be far, far older. It's possible that only Adam's Calendar is this old. While other structures in the area allegedly also line up with the rising and setting of the sun, this one seems to stand out as not being the foundations of an actual building. It definitely looks more like the stone circles seen around the world than remains of a building. Unfortunately, the main proponents of the belief that Adam's Calendar is much older than believed do not believe that our ancient ancestors created it. Whether the structure was created 500 years ago or 13,500 years ago, it's still a fascinating place that needs further study to better understand the lives of the people who used to live in the area and the histories of people who are often ignored when it comes to looking at the ancient past. When it comes to ancient Egypt, the one thing the civilization is known for as much as their pyramids are their mummies. The Egyptian mummy is now a history and horror icon. While civilizations around the world practiced mummification, it's the Egyptian mummies that most people think of first. The earliest Egyptian mummy we've discovered dates back to 4,300 years. Over the next 3,000 years or so, millions of people would have their remains mummified. Today, whole cemeteries of hundreds of mummies are discovered. Most are ordinary people, but even they can cause excitement for those interested in history. There's a special excitement around the remains of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. So far, roughly 60 royal mummies have been found and identified, with another 10 that may belong to ancient Egyptian royalty. A large cache of these mummies was found in 1871 that would change our understanding of ancient Egypt. Ahmed Rasul and his brother Mohammed were the first to discover the cache. The two were grave robbers who were walking alongside a cliff when Ahmed spotted what appeared to be a shaft covered by a boulder. When the brothers got inside the shaft, they found a long corridor that led to what appeared to be a royal tomb. The brothers told locals they had discovered a malevolent spirit in the tomb, and left the body of a donkey in the hole to create a smell that would keep away any other explorers. They then spent the next few years selling artifacts from the tomb, attracting the attention of more professional explorers who were eventually taken to the tomb themselves. 44 mummies were found in the tomb, along with a variety of other objects. What exactly was uncovered was never recorded. The coffins were taken from the tomb before any documentation could take place, and the tomb was later filled with rubble, damaging whatever artifacts remained. The mummies that have been identified belong to the 17th through 21st dynasties, a period of about 500 years. These included some of the most famous kings of ancient Egypt, such as Ramses the Great and Thutmose III. At least 11 of the mummies discovered were identified as ancient pharaohs, with many others being great wives, princes, princesses, and priests. The mummies didn't have their typical luxurious coffins, though. Many of these, including that of Ramses the Great, had already been discovered elsewhere. They were buried in simple coffins, but most still had their names inscribed on them. Names were important in ancient Egypt. To be buried without one would mean that the person would be denied access to the afterlife. So the fact that many of these were unidentified or even buried without their names was puzzling. One mummy in particular captured the attention of researchers and the imagination of the public. He was officially known as Unknown Man E, but would later be called the Screaming Mummy. Not only did this person not have his name with him, but he was also mummified in a very peculiar way. Rather than being wrapped in linen, he was wrapped in sheepskin, which was considered dirty and impure by the ancient Egyptians. When he was unwrapped, researchers found his mouth open and his face contorted into what looked like a silent scream. Most of the mummification process had been skipped. He'd been dried out with quicklime, and his organs remained in the body. The cedar coffin he was found in was too small for the man, and it had been widened to allow him to fit. The entire situation was extremely puzzling. The unknown man had been apparently treated with contempt by the people who had buried him, but he'd been buried with some of the most important people in ancient Egypt. Experts had 3 ideas about who Unknown Man E might have been. The first was a governor who'd been serving abroad when he passed away. While ancient Egyptians believed sheepskin was impure, it was commonly used in funeral practices of other nations. They wouldn't have necessarily known how the Egyptians mummified their loved ones, and just did the best they could before transporting him back to Egypt. The second possible identity of the man was a Hittite prince. After Tut passed away, his widow contacted the Hittite king to ask for a son that she could marry. He sent a prince, but according to Hittite records, his life was taken as soon as he crossed into Egypt. His remains were never recovered. The final possibility was that the remains belonged to a prince given the name Pentower. Pentower was one of the sons of Ramses III by his first wife. Not much is known about Pentower, including even his real name. He was scrubbed from the historical record for attempting and possibly succeeding in taking the life of his father. The plan had been for Pentower to take his place after Ramses passed away, but it's possible he was just being used as a tool by the conspirators. A papyrus named the Judicial Papyrus of Turin describes the trials of the conspirators, showing they were caught, but it's not known if that happened before or after they carried out their plan. When Ramses III's remains were discovered, there were signs he had a wound to his throat, indicating he didn't simply pass away from old age. Pentower was found guilty of his crimes, and he was described as being left alone before passing away. The papyrus describes Pentower as someone who bore the other name, suggesting his name was purposefully taken from him to try to erase his memory. The theory that the Screaming Mummy was Pentower was a popular one. It was believed that the mummy bore some resemblance to Ramses III, but it wasn't until recent DNA testing that Egyptologists were able to confirm that the mummy was indeed that of a son of Ramses III. Whether this is Pentower or one of his brothers cannot be known for certain, but archaeologists are pretty certain that this is the disgraced prince. The final question in this case is why? It seems like authorities in ancient Egypt went to great lengths to make sure Pentower wouldn't have his name and wouldn't be permitted to the afterlife. So why was he mummified at all? Other conspirators had their bodies destroyed entirely, and the fact that he was a prince wouldn't necessarily have protected Pentower from this fate. Some believe that a close friend or family member tried to mummify him, but they would have known that using sheepskin and not going through the normal practices would have denied him access to the afterlife. How the mummy came to be in this great cache is also a mystery. It's believed that Egyptian officials in antiquity removed the mummies from their official tombs in the Valley of the Kings to protect them from grave robbers. They would likely have known if Unknown Man E was the disgraced prince, and it seems strange that they made the same efforts to protect him as they did his father and other pharaohs. This final mystery is one we might never understand. Like a lot of ancient mysteries, it's often possible to figure out the what, who, and even the how, but figuring out the why is a lot harder to solve. Shadow of Innsmouth is a Lovecraftian story that tells of a town of fish-like people. Archaeologists are yet to find evidence of any similar civilization, but strange statues in the earliest known urban areas in Europe may have made some think that they just stumbled upon Innsmouth. Lipinski Vir once sat on the banks of the river in Serbia. It was discovered in the 1960s, having been forgotten for thousands of years. It may be the most important archaeological site in Europe, and holds the secrets of how farming began to spread from Anatolia into Central Europe. Today, the original site lies underwater, but archaeologists are still uncovering its secrets and finding new mysteries that need to be solved. The archaeological site is actually made up of one central settlement and 10 satellite villages. The whole site is named after the whirlpools in the area of the Danube. The name translates to red clay whirlpools, an accurate description of the river and its banks. The red clay ground is replaced in places by a limestone clay, mixed with ashes that form rocks as hard as concrete. This is the earliest known example of concrete flooring, and shows the foundations of the villages that once stood on the banks around 8,000 years ago. The homes were trapezoidal in shape, something else that hadn't been seen anywhere else in the world. It's believed that they were designed to resemble the volcanic hill that sits on the other side of the Danube. The layout of the house shows evidence of planning. In the central village, there was a large home with roughly 25 built around it. There were 2 large areas of open space that may have been marketplaces or places for ceremonies. All but one of the houses had entrances that pointed toward the river. The only house that didn't was blocked from the river by broken rocks that marked the boundary of the village, and it instead faced inwards towards the rest of the village. The homes alone would have been an amazing discovery, but what was found inside the homes was even more incredible. First, there were the remains of people. A number of human remains were found buried beneath the homes, while others were buried in a cemetery-like location outside the village. DNA testing on some of the remains showed a unique blend of cultures. There were now hunter-gatherers that lived in the area for generations. At the time, this was how everybody in Europe lived. However, there were also farmers that showed signs that they'd been born and lived in Anatolia. There was also evidence of later generations having DNA from both communities. Lipinski Vir was the site where a new wave of human migration into Europe was beginning, bringing with them farming and animal husbandry. How much intermingling of 2 cultures took place isn't clear. Early research suggested both cultures lived in the Lipinski Vir homes together, while new research suggests that the settlements were just for the farming community, but those farmers were friendly with the hunter-gatherers. What we do know is that there was some overlap in cultures. At the time, there were significant differences in burial practices between the 2 cultures. In Europe, most human remains up until that point were found stretched out. Farmers in the Near East buried their loved ones in a crouched or a fetal position. Remains found at Lipinski Vir were found in both positions. But when DNA analysis was done, they found that some of the hunter-gatherers were buried in fetal positions, and some of the farmers were buried stretched out. It was clear by the mixing of practices and the mixing of DNA that there was a blending of the 2 people. We still don't know much about the culture of the people at Lipinski Vir. The area had been occupied by hunter-gatherers long before the farmers arrived, and the Danube would have been an important source of food for them. The whirlpools that gave their name to the settlement created an oxygen-rich environment, and there were a lot of fish in the area. It's likely the people gave the river, or even the fish, a spiritual aspect that might have come in the form of a river god or a fish god, or the belief that ancestors came back as fish after they passed. The possible fish worship seems to have evidence in the form of fish-like human statues. Statues found at the site are the onlyest known portrait sculptures and the first larger-than-life sculptures. Pebbles from the Danube were used to create the art. Some of the art was simple geometric patterns, and this artwork was found in all 11 villages. But in the main village, the stone faces were found. These were carved into pebbles that came from the river. The faces had round, haunted eyes, large brows, and wide, downturned mouths. There are carved ears on the sides of their heads, and many have hair, beards, and upper torsos, though the torsos aren't proportional to the head. The mouths are described as fish-like, and the sculptures have other fish-like qualities. These stones were found on ledges behind the hearths that sat in the center of each of the houses. They were positioned so that light from the outside could reach them during the day. What exactly the hearth was used for is still debated. It may have been in place for cooking, and evidence of a fish roasting spit has been found. It may have also been a sacrificial altar. Another interesting aspect of the sculptures is how well made they were. While they might not look impressive to modern eyes, experts believe that it would have taken a lot of skill to craft them. They would have been made by somebody dedicated to making art, rather than each individual in the community making their own statue. This was a community that had enough wealth to be able to support artists. It's also believed that the shape of their homes indicates some level of mathematical understanding beyond what would have been expected for a Mesolithic society. There's still much we don't know about Lipinski Vir culture. Unfortunately, there may be things we can never know. Not long after the settlement was discovered, new dams were built on the Danube and the area was flooded. Archaeologists uncovered as much as possible and moved the site to a second location, further away from the river, but much was destroyed during the transition. It's also possible that more artifacts were left undiscovered and now sit beneath the water. Despite the move, there are still new things being discovered, and at least some of the questions we have about the site may one day be answered. It's often said that we know more about outer space than our own oceans. That's a bit of a hyperbole, but it's true that the vast majority of our oceans remain unexplored. What we found lying deep beneath the surface of the sea are creatures that truly look like they're from another planet. These creatures have adapted to almost no light and extremely high pressures. Some live near hydrothermal vents and feed on nutrients that come from those vents. In some ways, they're really more like aliens than modern depictions of extraterrestrials, as they're designed to live in a world so different from our own. The vast array of life that has been discovered at the bottom of our oceans has given hope to fans of cryptozoology that some of the creatures of legend might be real. There are creatures that have been discovered that were previously believed to be mythical, like the giant squid, but others may be waiting to be discovered. Of those, the Ningen may be the most mysterious. The Ningen is a sea creature that is said to live in the waters around Antarctica. Because of its remote location, it's managed to go unnoticed for centuries, and it was only in 2003 that word of this creature started to surface. The story of the Ningen begins on the Japanese message board of 2channel. There, a user posted a story told to them by a friend who was working on a whaling research vessel. He claimed they were humans in Antarctica. When the user asked if he meant the scientists on research bases, he said no. These humanoid figures live in the oceans. The first time that one was spotted was by the men on the research vessel. They at first thought that it was a submarine, but when they got closer, they realized it was a living creature. They were white or gray in color and looked like icebergs sitting just below the surface of the water. They apparently varied in size and shape, but most were comparable in size to whales. Some had 4 limbs, like humans, while others had tails instead of legs. Some were described as looking like 2 human torsos put together. The heads were usually devoid of facial features, apart from 2 eyes on the sides or underside of their heads and a slit for a mouth. They were also described as having blubbery bodies, like a whale. The researchers simply called them Ningen, which translates to human. The story captured the imagination of internet users on the forum, then became more popular when featured in a Japanese paranormal magazine in 2007. This magazine article, entitled Google Earth Mystery, produced the first suspected photograph of a Ningen. The creature was captured on Google Earth off the coast of Namibia, suggesting that it doesn't just stick to the oceans around Earth's most southern continent. It was clearly enormous and had one outstretched limb and the other pulled slightly back. The magazine suggested it may have been a Ningen or some other type of cryptid. It also reminded readers of a strange event that had taken place in 1958. The Japanese research vessel Soya was en route to an international project based in Antarctica. It was following the route of an American research vessel, so when it spotted something black floating in the water, it figured it was just a barrel dropped by an American ship. As they grew closer, they realized it wasn't a barrel at all. Just like the researchers that first spotted the Ningen, they realized it was a living creature. One person looked through a telescope at the creature, which only had its head poking above the water. He reportedly cried "Godzilla." Another sailor went onto the bridge to try to take a photo, but it had disappeared back under the sea by the time the sailor reached the bridge. According to the sailors, the head was between 70 and 80 centimeters in length and round on top. It was covered in dark brown fur and had a face like a cow, with the exception of its pointed ears. Despite the fur, the sailor who looked through the telescope believed it was a lizard-like creature. Some believed that the sailors mistook whales or some other natural creature as a monster. Alternatively, it could have been a collective hallucination or a complete hoax. Some cryptozoologists argued that this might have been a kind of Ningen. The fact it had fur doesn't exactly match the descriptions of Ningen, but given how varied the reports of Ningen creatures are, it's possible there's more than one type. There have been a few images over the years. Most pictures of Ningen are obviously faked. Sometimes those are simply artistic representations of what the artist thinks a Ningen would look like, while others believe that the faked pictures are put out to deliberately discredit actual sightings of the Ningen. According to the first post about these mysterious creatures, the Japanese authorities wanted to keep quiet about the existence of Ningen. Whaling remains a fairly controversial issue in Japan. While the country was briefly part of the International Whaling Commission, Japanese whaling vessels continued to work in the Southern Ocean, claiming to be doing so for research purposes. It was argued that reporting on the Ningen, which could be seen as somewhere between humans and whales, could impact the Japanese public's perception of whaling. Other theories suggested that the Ningen produced a rare chemical that was either medicinal or highly poisonous and could be used in weapons. Even without any interference, capturing photos or footage of a Ningen would be difficult. They're supposedly nocturnal, live in the hardest to reach environments, and if the 1958 creature was a Ningen, can apparently move very fast. However, there are a few videos that claim to have captured footage of the elusive creature. The most believable of these videos comes from JAMSTEC, or the Japanese Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology. The video, dated August 24, 2010, shows what looks like a light-colored creature on the sea floor. Its eyes are a bright white, and it seems to have its mouth hanging open. Apparently, it had been moving, but when the camera came closer, it stopped. What we see of the creature lines up closely with the descriptions of the Ningen. As with all cryptids, it's possible that one day the creature will actually be found and added to the list of confirmed animal species. With sea creatures, that seems even more likely, but for now, this creature remains a mystery. The United Kingdom does have some interesting wildlife, including foxes, deer, and even recently reintroduced bison. But when it comes to big cats, the only ones prowling freely are the critically endangered Scottish wildcat. But some believe that there may be many other big cats roaming in the wild across England and Wales. Stories about larger-than-normal cats living in the wilderness date back hundreds of years. There are many legends of large supernatural animals that haunt one particular area of a country, while many are described as dog-like or unlike anything that had previously been seen. There are a fair number of these supernatural cats said to be waiting for their next victim. But British big cats aren't paranormal, according to believers. For decades, owning exotic pets was very fashionable and a way to show off your wealth. People would adopt the cubs of cats from Africa and the Americas. In particular, black leopards or panthers were very popular. They were even sold at stores like Harrods. In 1979, the Dangerous Wild Animals Act was introduced. The act outlawed owning many animals without a license, including most primates, bears, and large cats. Most people surrendered their cats to zoos, but some decided that a life in captivity wasn't right for their family pet unless it was with them. They released the cats into the wild. According to experts, the cats wouldn't have survived long in the wild. Most were quickly recovered as they had no ability to look after themselves. Those that did escape capture didn't live long enough to reproduce. There have been the occasional escapes of illegal pets in the decades since the act came into power, but according to officials, those are quickly recaptured. There are no big cats in England and Wales, but hundreds of people have claimed to have seen them over the years. One of the people who had a close encounter with the so-called alien black cat was David Spencer. He didn't believe the rumors so much, but didn't want to be caught off guard if he did come across one of these animals. It was January of 1995 that he saw one for the first time. He was walking his dog early in the morning when he heard the sound of steps behind him. He turned, thinking it would be a horse in a field, only to find a panther bounding towards him. David shouted, and the cat swerved at the last moment before rushing off down the road. David didn't think that the cat was coming for him. Instead, the cat had been at the end of its orbital night prowl, and David had happened to cross its path. The encounter made David a firm believer in what would be called the Rutland Panther. According to the Rutland Panther Watch, there are two types of big cats that exist in the wild in England and Wales. Those are black panthers and cats with brown to sandy colored coats, which are believed to be pumas. The site claims that the ex-pets were able to adapt easily to the British countryside. Even though panthers are native to Africa and Asia, the cold would not be an issue for either type of cat due to their fur. There would also be an abundance of wildlife for the animals to prey on. They typically prefer animals like rodents, rabbits, or small deer, but have been known to attack domestic cats and even dogs when approached. They don't bother attacking humans though, and have instead learned to live alongside them. They're often spotted lounging and watching the person that spots them, rather than lurking and waiting for the right time to pounce. Even livestock aren't often the prey for these animals, even though they've been known to attack sheep from time to time. Panther Watch has received countless calls over the years from people who were certain that they had seen what David called the magnificent creatures. David sadly passed away in 2012, but his work lives on, as do the sightings. In 2019, a couple named Kaylee and Adam Holmes claimed their dog had gotten up close to the Rutland Panther. They had been walking their Labrador Rottweiler cross on a Sunday afternoon. The dog ran off into a wooded area, and Adam followed not too far behind. He got to the top of a ridge and noticed his dog growling at a large black cat. Adam threw a log towards the cat, which made it run back into the woods. The dog had suffered a scratch to the front of its face and was limping, though the couple couldn't be sure that it was down to the cat or if the dog had done it to himself. They contacted the police and became firm believers in the Rutland Panther. In 2021, there was another sighting. Michelle Lee lived beside some farmland about 5 minutes from a reservoir. It was the perfect spot to go nature watching, and she and her son were on the lookout for bats when they noticed something strange prowling in the distance. Michelle took a video on her phone but had to zoom in close to get a clear image of the creature because it was so far away. She claimed if it had been a regular-sized cat, she wouldn't have been able to see it at the distance that she was at. It's hard to make out just how big it is in the video, though when compared to some equipment nearby, it does seem bigger than a regular cat. Michelle isn't the only person to have captured the Rutland Panther or other big cats on camera. For example, a man named Jonathan Terry captured footage of a cat running through the fields behind his house in North Wales. Many experts dismissed the footage, claiming that the images are too blurry or perspective makes the cats look bigger than they actually are. Other evidence includes footprints that have been found near animal attacks, as well as the animal attacks themselves featuring tooth marks from large felines. The best piece of evidence came in May of 2023. It was the second suspected big cat at this farm, and this time a large lamb had been the victim. After searching the perimeters of the property, the farmer found wool and black fur caught on a barbed wire fence. The fur was sent off to be tested and was determined to be a 99% match to a leopard. For believers, this was the best proof possible. but skeptics still believe this could simply be a case of an isolated escape. Even if there isn't a self-sustaining population of big cats in the UK, it's possible that cats are continuing to be introduced into the environment. Even after the Dangerous Animals Act was passed, there are still people who want to keep the unique animals as pets, with cubs available for as little as 100 pounds. Once those become too large to handle, they're often released into the wild, continuing to fuel the urban legend of the alien big cats. The Jersey Devil is one of the most well-known creatures from folklore. It's been cited by hundreds of people since it was allegedly born in the 1700s, with photos taken of the creature as recently as 2017. According to the legend, the Jersey Devil was born in 1735 in the Pine Barrens of what would become New Jersey. The Leeds family was one of the first families to settle in the area, and the descendants of these early settlers still live in the area today. Mother Leeds was known for her many children and a husband who was an unsavory character. They already had 12 children when she discovered she was pregnant once again. She lifted her hands above her head and cursed the child, proclaiming that this one would be the devil. Months later, when the baby was born, it appeared to be a normal, healthy child. That was until it morphed into a horrifying devil creature that looked like a combination of a horse, goat, and a bat. It took the life of its mother, then attacked its siblings, before flying up through the chimney and into the dark and stormy night. Another version of the tale claims that the creature's father was literally the devil, but the outcome of its birth was the same. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, it lurked in the Pine Barrens, taking advantage of anybody who decided to camp out in the forest or wander through alone. Its cries could be heard in the forests and the bogs. Many who didn't know the legend described hearing a woman screaming, but when they told local residents, they were informed that they had a close encounter with the Jersey Devil. Its territory gradually grew, and it began terrorizing local towns and cities. For a week in 1909, sightings of the Jersey Devil reached a peak. Between January 16th and 23rd, almost 1,000 people saw the creature in the Delaware Valley. People would see strange footprints that resemble horseshoes or cloven feet walking through fields, over and under fences, and even across rooftops. One of the many witnesses of the creature itself was Navy Commander Stephen Decatur, who was testing cannonballs at the Hanover Mills Works. He fired at the creature and managed to hit it, but it carried on flying. It was seen as far away as Camden and Bristol in Pennsylvania, where police officers tried to take the creature down with no success. No people were hurt, but the creature was said to have taken out livestock. One woman even found the devil trying to eat her pet dog, but she hit it with the broom and it flew off. Witnesses described the creature as looking like a flying kangaroo, while others described ostrich-like features. Schools were closed, and even some mills had to be temporarily shut down, as workers wouldn't go through the forest to get to the mills. After a week, sightings of the creature stopped, but it stayed in people's memories. There have been more sporadic sightings over the years. In 1960, residents in Mays Landing heard the creature rather than saw it. The screams sent people into a panic, and even though the police tried to assure the public that the Jersey Devil wasn't real, people struggled to find a reasonable explanation for the screams. That same year, a wealthy merchant offered a $250,000 reward for the creature. In a wanted poster from the time, the Jersey Devil is described as a kangaroo-like patchwork with the face of a horse, the head of a dog, leathery bat-like wings, horns, small arms, and cloven hooves, and a forked tail. Nobody was able to produce a specimen to claim the reward. Another story took place on Route 9 in Bayville at 10 o'clock at night. The creature ran out in front of traffic, causing 3 cars to slam on their brakes. The witness described something huge, at least 10 feet tall. It was bigger than any deer he had ever seen and was moving much faster. It darted off into the woods before the witness could even realize what he was looking at. One of the main differences from sighting to sighting of the Jersey Devil is its size. The Route 9 creature was at least 10 feet tall, while other sightings have been described as around 7 feet tall. The first person to have claimed to have photographed the legendary creature saw something much smaller. Dave Black was a security guard from Little Egg Harbor, New Jersey, who spotted the creature while driving home from work. He was driving past a golf course when he spotted what he thought looked like a llama moving in and out of the trees. He stopped his car to get a proper look at the creature. It was then that it sprouted wings and flew off. Dave caught a photo of the creature on his phone. The photo showed the silhouette of a goat with wings. It was much smaller than the other sightings of the Jersey Devil. Many dismissed Dave's sighting, even though he insisted it wasn't staged or photoshopped. His sighting became even less credible when another person claimed to have seen the same creature a few days later, just 9 miles away. This witness recorded a video, which was even more obviously fake. But that hasn't diminished people's belief in the legendary creature. Another sighting with photographs came in 2017. It was the afternoon of June 3rd, 2017. Michael Robinson and his sons, Stefan and Jaden, had gone out to the Pine Barrens. They had heard about the Jersey Devil from an online documentary and wanted to see what the area where the creature had come from was like. After stopping near a boggy field, they looked out into the countryside and saw nothing. The group then drove a little further down the road to check out a bar. It was on their way back that Michael spotted the creature. He saw something that looked like a horse in the field, but it was hard to make out because the car was moving so fast. He pulled off into the same rest area that he had before and looked out. In the middle of the field was the creature. It looked like a horse from behind and was walking away from them, but when it moved its head from side to side, it was clearly not anything that the group had seen before. This creature was only 3 feet tall and was dark brown or almost black. The creature was between 100 and 150 yards away when Stefan took a series of photos on his phone. The images were much more blurry than the one taken by Dave Black, but did seem to more closely resemble the creature described in the 1960 wanted poster. The truth behind the Jersey Devil, or Leeds Devil, remains a mystery. According to one expert, the devil originated as part of a campaign against a Quaker named Daniel Leeds, who lived in the late 1600s. Leeds was in government and was writing an almanac, but apparently had an interest in the occult or pagan gods. He was disliked by the public, and pamphlets were made about him being evil. His son had an even worse reputation. Titan Leeds became enemies with Benjamin Franklin and was a British loyalist. When he passed away, Franklin described him as a devilish ghost. The story of the Leeds family being in league with the devil was later co-opted into a story about an actual devil in the mid-1800s, and the legend was created. But it is possible there's something mysterious hiding in the countryside of New Jersey, keeping the legend alive. The Yeti is one of the most famous cryptids out there. It's also sometimes called the Abominable Snowman, a mistranslation from the Tibetan language, which would more accurately be translated as a man-sized wild creature. The Yeti closely resembles the North American Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and may even be a cousin of some kind. It's a tall, human-like creature, standing between 7 and 8 feet tall, with reddish-brown fur. It's most commonly found in the Himalayan mountains, though there have been sightings in the most remote regions of Russia. It appears to prefer the colder temperatures, hence its nickname, and hides in forested areas when mountains aren't available to keep it secret. In Tibet, belief in the Yeti dates back to ancient times, with tales of wild people living in the mountains becoming part of local folklore. The Yetis were dangerous and should be stayed away from. Those that don't believe the Yeti is or was an actual creature see the stories of the creature as a cautionary tale for children, warning them to stay away from wild animals. There are plenty of wild animals in the Himalayas that would warrant such tales, including big cats and brown and black bears. When Europeans began exploring the area in the 19th and 20th centuries, it's believed that the bears in the area, combined with stories of the Yeti, made the cryptid a reality. In recent years, there have been dozens of hair samples sent to laboratories around the world to try to prove that at least one of the many recent sightings could be attributed to something that science has never seen before. Most of those samples came back as belonging to known mammals. 2 interesting samples were sent to Bhutan and India that had a 100% match with DNA from the jawbone of an extinct species of polar bear. While not an ape, it was of interest, but later analysis showed that the creature was likely just a brown bear. Despite the lack of definitive evidence, it hasn't stopped some from believing that the Yeti is out there. That belief is strong in Russia. Russia has its own ancient tales of wild men living in the hardest to reach places. These creatures sometimes resemble the Yeti, with dark fur covering their entire bodies, while others look more like cavemen. Native people living in Siberia allegedly have stories of these mysterious people, dating back hundreds or even thousands of years. But sightings are even rarer than those of the Yeti. It's also possible that the sightings of the creature are attributed to Yetis. Russia has taken a great interest in Yetis, leading the way in trying to prove that the creature exists. In 2011, it held a conference where scientists and cryptozoologists came together to discuss the creature. It was claimed that there was undeniable proof that the creature existed, and participants in the conference were shown a cave where a Yeti was believed to have set up a nest for itself. It had twisted trees to create markings for its territory, and tracks that supposedly came from the unidentified creature. Skeptics were less certain, claiming that the twisted trees looked man-made, and questioning why nobody left cameras in the cave to capture real footage of this elusive creature. The conference also shared testimony from local people, who claimed that the unidentified creature was responsible for taking livestock. One man even claimed to have rescued an abominable snowman from a river, but it ran off as soon as it was on dry land. There have been a few alleged photos and videos of the creature, including one terrifying encounter from 2013. A group of boys discovered a strange set of footprints in an otherwise pristine field of snow near the frozen Ur River. The prints were enormous, with only small gaps between them. They were also in a single line, unlike typical animal prints. It was as if the creature had been carefully clearing a path through the snow. The boys followed the prints with one recording on his cell phone. The tracks led to a wooded area where the boys were able to see a figure. The cameraman got closer, wanting a better look at the creature. At one point, the camera cuts. The boy was recording on a cheap phone, and it's not uncommon for them to switch off in the cold. The recording quickly starts again, and the figure is still partially hidden behind the trees, but is standing watching the newcomers. It then starts to move, and the boy runs off in a panic. At first, the boys didn't want to tell anybody about the sighting, as it seemed too strange to be real. One eventually told his grandparents, who had the footage sent off to be analyzed. Experts have analyzed the video, and while they admit that it isn't very clear, they do believe it is good evidence. At first, they believed the creature had extremely long arms before they realized that the boy hadn't just captured footage of one Yeti. The creature also had a baby with it, and the long arms were actually the legs of a child. It's believed that the adult had tried to make a path for its child, which explained the misshapen prints and why they were so close together. Experts also visited the site and found that all the trees had been damaged at a height of 150 to 170 centimeters. 2 trees had also been gnawed. The expert recommended the villagers leave out food for the Yetis. Mainstream scientists in Russia still believe the Yeti to be fake, and even the boys' school principal believed the incident was just a stunt, but local officials praised the sighting. On the morning of January 8, 2023, the Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico began to grumble again. A local man who was out early that morning took a few photos of the volcano with smoke pouring from its crater. It wasn't until later that he realized he'd captured the latest UFO sighting. Strange activity has surrounded the Popocatépetl and the surrounding area for centuries. In particular, the area is something of a UFO hotspot, with strange objects and possibly strange creatures seen flying in and out of the volcano. By the 1570s, when the Spanish began to settle in the area, it had already seen countless battles between native Mexican groups. It was only a few generations after the Aztec Empire had taken over the empire. The people they had taken over had also fought over the land. It had seen plenty of violence, with some believing that it captured angry spirits in the area. The Spanish also soon experienced paranormal activity in the area. According to legend, indigenous elders created a thought form that took on the image of the devil. It chased the Spanish up a hill before falling into a well where it was destroyed. The hill was later named after Saint Michael. Now, Cerro de San Miguel watches as something not demonic but extraterrestrial haunts the area. Popocatépetl is one of the tallest volcanoes in Mexico, and the most active. Its latest eruption has lasted since 2004. Other than the occasional warning encouraging residents to wear masks due to smoke, the eruption has had little impact on the people that live in the volcano's shadow. It's become more of a nuisance than anything else, although images of the eruption would sometimes be featured on the news. It was during one of these broadcasts in 2014 that hundreds of people called their news station to report a UFO. On June 9th, a live stream of the eruption was serving as a background to a presenter on a morning news magazine show. As people watched the presenter, they noticed a black object emerge from the volcano. This wasn't one of the superheated rocks that were occasionally thrown from the crater. This object hovered for a while before moving off screen. After receiving many calls about the UFO, the news station checked with a webcam that continuously records the volcano. And sure enough, the strange object had been caught there too. What the object was has never been completely explained. By this point, there was already a popular conspiracy theory about the volcano. It was one of the UFO hotspots of the world, and some believers in the extraterrestrial thought the volcano served as a portal to an alien base. The theory goes that we shouldn't be looking into the sky to search for extraterrestrials. They're already here on Earth, living below ground. Popocatépetl is one of the portals to this world, which lies between 4 and 6 miles beneath the volcano. How the aliens and UFOs survived the geothermal activity is unclear. Every so often, large unidentified objects will emerge from the crater. They show signs of intelligent movement and will hover or change directions in an unnatural manner. One sighting of these strange objects showed one larger object crossing paths with a smaller one. According to a UFO expert, these objects were actually exchanging passengers. The largest of these objects are hundreds of meters across, and most are spheres or disks. It was one of these disks that was caught on camera in January of 2023. Louis Guerra was in his backyard preparing for breakfast when the volcano began erupting again. He took the photos and sent them to his girlfriend, who posted them to her WhatsApp story. It was only when friends pointed out the strange object that they realized what they had encountered. The image went viral online, with nobody able to say for certain what the object was. It was dark in color and appeared to have just come from behind a plume of smoke. Only one photo was posted, so it's impossible to make out what direction the craft was moving in or at what speed, making it even harder to identify. Many have suggested that UFOs spotted around the crater of the active volcano might be helicopters or aircraft. It's possible for helicopters to fly over volcanoes even during eruptions, so this could be a possibility. But the January 2023 image doesn't seem to be a helicopter. Spheres and flying saucers aren't the strangest things to come out of Popocatépetl. Some of the mysterious objects emerging from the volcano appear to be humanoid. UFO hunters have caught images that appear to be people flying in the sky. The people are sometimes positioned as if they're standing in midair, while others appear to be sitting. Some seem to have jetpack-like devices, while others don't have any explanation for their flying abilities. Some will move arms or legs, indicating that they're not just a strangely shaped rock, but something with the ability to move parts of itself. The humanoids are always dark in color. According to UFO experts, it's not certain whether these strange humanoids are related to the UFOs that have been spotted, but the chances seem high. It's believed that these are extraterrestrials that don't need ships to be able to survive the journey from the subterranean world to the atmosphere. Some of these creatures have even been spotted on slopes of the volcano. They're able to move quickly without any climbing equipment. Footprints found in the ash indicate that they might have some sort of claw coming from the back of their leg, which would assist in climbing the steep slopes. The creatures are the same color as the ash, between 7 and 8 feet tall and extremely skinny. These strange creatures are one of 2 paranormal creatures that exist on the mountain. The others are supposedly white with large black eyes. According to one of the people that's seen these strange creatures, they act as custodians of the forest and have been seen here since ancient times. The tall, dark figures are newcomers and come from inside the volcano itself. If Popocatépetl isn't the entrance to an alien base, why has it attracted so many UFOs? The volcano isn't far from Mexico City, but that alone wouldn't warrant it becoming one of the most visited locations in the world for UFOs. Some believe that the geology of the volcano itself and magnetism within the rocks attracts the strange objects. It may also be that because this is an active volcano, with a 24-hour webcam aimed at it, it's simply more likely that something strange will be captured on camera here. Around the world, there are many creepy urban legends that surround taking things from places where nature put them. Sometimes even taking a small chip of rock is enough for a traveler to earn a terrifying curse. In the United States, the Escalante Petrified Forest in northeast Arizona is the source of one such curse. The petrified forest began life in the Triassic period as a lush tropical wetland. Trees and other vegetation grew around a series of rivers and streams. When trees would fall, they would often fall into the rivers and be washed downstream before being buried in sediment. This slowed down the process of decay and gave time for minerals to grow in the spaces that organic material left behind. A volcanic eruption added to the process. Millions of years later, the result of that process was revealed. The petrified wood is now made up of minerals like quartz. Some are a rainbow of colors, and the tree rings are still visible in some specimens. In 1906, the area became a national monument, and in 1962 it became a national park. As such, removing anything from the park is actually illegal. The park managers want the area of natural beauty to be preserved for generations to come, and that can't happen if visitors take these souvenirs with them. The area is also the subject of scientific studies, and the removal of rocks from the landscape can hinder our ability to learn how these processes work, and more about the world that we live in. For decades, park rangers have been trying to figure out how to stop people from stealing petrified wood, but it seems like the wood itself may prove to be the best deterrent. Starting in the 1930s, the park has received hundreds of letters from visitors returning their illegal souvenirs. Some simply state that they're sorry and want others to witness the park as they saw it. Others come with the warning of a curse. The curse has been blamed for bad luck, marriage problems, visitors losing their jobs, and even health problems. One letter even described illness in the family, losing a family pet, home appliances failing, and auto accidents. The final straw for the family was a gas well near their home blowing a cap, which meant that they had to be evacuated. The rocks they had taken were returned with a request for them to be put back where they were found. Unfortunately, the rocks can't be put back exactly where nature left them. Normally, visitors can't remember where they were picked up, and putting them back into the forest haphazardly risks ruining scientific research. Instead, the rocks are piled near the visitor center, near a book of the letters. How this urban legend started is hard to pin down, but it's believed to have come from a park ranger who had a similar legend about rocks taken from the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. That ranger was supposedly working in the 1940s though, while the earliest of these letters dates to the 1930s. The Black Swine of Hampstead is a disturbing urban legend from Victorian London, which still sends a shiver down the spine of anybody who has to work in the subterranean world. The creepy urban legend was conclusively disproven after Joseph Bazalgette's brick sewers were built in 1875, but it remains one of London's darker legends. The urban legend originated in the 1700s or early 1800s. At the time, there was a rudimentary sewer system beneath and sometimes in the streets of London. It started as a way to simply drain rainwater before the law ordered all latrines to empty into the sewers. Those sewers would then empty into the River Thames. Parts of the sewers were accessible to humans, though the average height of the tunnels was only 3.5 feet. It didn't seem like the kind of place humans would want to go, but hundreds of people would wander through the tunnels every day looking for treasure. These people were sewer hunters or toshers. They would go into the tunnels in small groups in search of coins and jewelry, which may have slipped through the grates into the dingy underworld. The job could earn as much as 6 shillings a day, which was a decent income for Victorian London's working class. It wasn't without dangers though. Twice a day, the tunnels would be completely flooded during high tide. The dark tunnels were difficult to navigate and easy to get lost in, but the biggest danger came from animal attacks. Unsurprisingly, the sewers were home to a large number of rodents who could be particularly ferocious. Though the sewer hunters had tools that could be used as weapons, the rodents would overcome a lone hunter with devastating consequences. Even if a sewer hunter survived a rat attack, the bites could easily become infected given the environment that they lived and worked in. There was something even more ferocious than the rats though. According to an urban legend, beneath the streets of Hampstead was a group of black feral pigs. The legend stated that the pig managed to escape into the sewers, where she grew large feeding on the waste from butcher shops. She then gave birth to a litter of young. The young grew up in the sunless conditions, feeding on all manner of waste from butchers' shops and other inhabitants of London. They were enormous and even more feared than the rats. The sewer hunters took the legend of these wild animals very seriously. There was even an explanation for why the pigs had never been able to escape from the Hampstead sewers. When a journalist writing a book on London's poor heard the story of the black swine of Hampstead, he dismissed it as nothing more than a myth and pointed out that nobody had actually seen the pigs through the sewer grates. After the Great Stink, new sewers were built beneath London. Every inch was inspected by engineer Joseph Bazalgette, who found no evidence of the terrifying sewer pigs. The urban legend was nothing more than a legend. Those sewers still make up much of the system that remains today, and who knows what now lurks in the subterranean labyrinth. One of the strangest urban legends is a story about how the British Royal Navy tried to put to bed an even older and unsettling myth. Sailors are typically superstitious. It makes sense some of these ships are at the mercy of the sea and the wind. Even those that might consider themselves to be level-headed might decide to not bring aboard something considered unlucky, simply not to tempt fate. Bananas and flowers are among the things considered unlucky to bring on board, as well as priests, redheads, and women. But these superstitions go beyond what or who is allowed aboard the ship. Even the date or the day of the week that the ship is launched can be considered unlucky. The first Monday in April is traditionally unlucky, as this is said to be the day that the biblical Cain took the life of his brother Abel. The first Monday in August is also unlucky, as this is the day that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. But the unluckiest day to launch a ship is a Friday. Why exactly Fridays are such bad luck isn't clear. This may be a reference to Good Friday, though some sources claim that Good Friday is the only Friday that's safe to set sail on. Whatever the reason, it was a serious problem for the British Royal Navy in the 19th century. Having 2 days out of the calendar when setting sail was forbidden wouldn't be too bad, but not being able to set sail on a Friday was too much. To try to expel these superstitions, the Navy decided to launch HMS Friday. The ship wouldn't only set sail on her maiden voyage on a Friday, but her keel would be laid down on a Friday and her launch would also be on a Friday. She would be under the command of Captain James Friday, and the date of her maiden voyage was to be Friday the 13th. The launch went as planned, and HMS Friday disappeared over the horizon. Unfortunately for Captain Friday and all those on board, the ship was never seen again. Rather than expelling the superstition, the Royal Navy had confirmed it. However, there's no record of an HMS Friday or a Captain Friday. Even the year when this ship is said to have set sail is a mystery. HMS Friday appears to be nothing more than a strange urban legend. The elevator game is one of the most popular and a subset of creepy urban legends that surround rituals that either take you to another plane or bring beings from other planes into this one. It's believed to have originated on the Japanese internet forums in 2008 and has since spread around the world. The legend surrounds a game played in the elevator of a building that must have at least 10 floors. The player must enter the elevator alone or with other players and visit a specific series of floors, but never step out. At one point, the player must request the 5th floor. When the elevator arrives, a strange woman will get into the elevator with the player. According to the legend, this woman isn't a person. She should not be interacted with or even acknowledged. Then the player must request the 1st floor. If the elevator goes to the 1st floor, the player should leave immediately, never to return. This means that the ritual didn't work. But if the elevator instead goes up to the 10th floor, the ritual worked. Only now can a player step out. What exactly is seen at this point varies from telling to telling. The original version of the urban legend said nothing about what would happen when the ritual was completed. Most later versions claimed that the player would be transported to another world, where they would find themselves completely alone. If they looked outside, they would see the city where they'd been in the real world, but a large red cross would be visible in the sky. To return to the real world, the player must find their original elevator and complete the same sequence of floors. If, in the end, the elevator returns to the 1st floor, the player has been returned to the real world. If the elevator tries to go up again, the player must press every button to try to get it to stop. Not long after the creepy urban legend appeared on forums, other posts described what happened to people when they completed the game. The eerie details about the strange woman and the other world only added to the creepiness of the urban legend. It's simply a story, but fears surrounding elevators or enclosed spaces in general are nothing new. The story of the elevator game also originated a few years after a series of elevator malfunctions in Japan, which may have helped inspire the legend. In life, Elizaveta Demidov was a beautiful, light-hearted young aristocrat, but one that wouldn't have been remembered as being particularly remarkable if it wasn't for a creepy urban legend that surrounded her grave. Elizaveta passed away in Paris in 1818 at the age of just 39. She was originally from Russia and was born into a wealthy family. She then married Nikolai Demidov, a member of another wealthy family. Her own heritage gave her the title of Baroness, while Nikolai had earned a position as a diplomat and was posted in Paris. Elizaveta fell in love with the French city. She and her husband had to leave when tensions between Russia and France grew under the reign of Napoleon Bonaparte, but Elizaveta returned to the capital after separating from her husband. She would pass away on April 8, 1818, and was buried the following day. Her mausoleum was built in the style of a Greek temple. Stone pillars were built on the main structure and capped with a statue of eternal flames. All around the tomb were intricate etchings and gargoyles that would spout water. It was a beautiful structure and remains a draw to those wandering through the cemetery to this day. But some 80 years later, stories appeared in newspapers around the world about the final will of the Baroness. It was claimed that Elizaveta had promised 1,000,000 francs to whoever would stay in her tomb for 365 days and 366 nights. The person would have to be alone at all times. A servant could bring meals, but the tomb guardian was not permitted to talk to them. The guardian could read by the light of a candle and was permitted to leave the tomb for 1 hour a day, but only after the gates of the cemetery had closed for the night. Reports stated that the Baroness had been buried in a crystal coffin, and the interior of the tomb was lined with mirrors so that she would always be visible. A number of people had attempted to win the 1,000,000 francs. Most lasted only a few days. The longest anybody lasted was 3 weeks. That person had completely lost his sanity by the end of his ordeal. Others suffered health problems not long after leaving the tomb. Some reported feeling as if their life force was being drained while they were inside. Even today, visitors to the tomb have only seen it from the outside and have described a similar sensation. It was rumored that Elizaveta was actually a vampire, and the symbols around her tomb were used to confirm that. In actuality, though, the symbols represented her family's wealth. Thousands of letters were sent by people around the world who wanted to win the 1,000,000 francs. All would be disappointed as there was no competition. The urban legend appears to have been made up by a newspaper in Chicago and was picked up by other newspapers. Some printed stories calling out the hoax, but it didn't stop people from applying for the creepy job in hopes that they could win their fortunes. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.